3:45 p.m. The explosion tore through Cedar Falls like thunder. Glass erupted. Steel screamed. The 10-story Ashford Industries building showered debris as it began its violent descent into chaos. Smoke poured from shattered windows. People fled in terror, their screams echoing off concrete walls. But Ryan Mitchell ran toward the collapsing tower, his worn work boots hammering against asphalt as burning debris showered down like deadly rain. Sirens wailed in the distance, their urgent cries seeming to ask the same question as the bystanders who watched in horror. Why would anyone run towards such danger? Why would this man, this ordinary electrician with faded jeans and calloused hands, race into a collapsing building that even professional rescuers hesitated to enter? The answer lay in what had happened 8 hours earlier, in the moments and choices that had led Ryan Mitchell to this impossible decision. 8 hours earlier, 6:30 a.m. had started like any other day in the Mitchell household. Grace sat at their tiny kitchen table, carefully spreading peanut butter on day-old bread while Ryan packed his weathered toolbox. The 7-year-old hummed softly to herself, her blonde hair catching the pale sunlight streaming through their apartment's single window. Bills covered half the table like unwelcome guests, each one stamped with bold red letters that screamed "overdue" in unforgiving capital letters. "Daddy, will you be home for dinner tonight?" Grace asked, not looking up from her sandwich. Her voice carried that careful tone children use when they're trying not to sound disappointed. Ryan glanced at Helen's watch on his wrist, the scratched face showing 6:32 a.m. exactly. The timepiece had been running slow for months, but he couldn't bring himself to fix it or replace it. Some things were meant to stay broken, he thought, like a monument to what once was. "I'll try, sweetheart," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Mrs. Henderson will pick you up from school if I'm running late." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. He knew he'd be working until dark, chasing every dollar to keep their heads above water. Grace nodded and took a bite of her sandwich, pretending not to notice that there was no jelly to go with the peanut butter. They'd run out 3 days ago, and grocery money wouldn't come until Friday. "We need more jelly," Grace said simply, not complaining, just stating a fact. Ryan's hand paused over his toolbox. He fought the impulse to check his wallet again, knowing exactly what he'd find. 1837 Oz. Not enough for the water bill. Not enough for Grace's school supplies. Certainly not enough for both. "I know, Gracie. We'll get some on Friday, okay?" He forced a smile. "Maybe the strawberry kind you like." Grace nodded, looking up with those impossibly blue eyes so much like Helen's that it sometimes stole his breath. "I know, Daddy. It's okay." Ryan shouldered his tool bag and headed for the door, but Grace's voice stopped him. "Daddy, Mommy's watch is still keeping good time, right?" He turned to see her watching him. "Yes, baby girl," he whispered, his throat tight. "It's keeping perfect time." The watch face caught the morning light, and for just a moment, he could almost hear Helen's voice telling him that love doesn't need to be perfect to be real. 2 years since cancer took her, and still sometimes her presence felt so real he could almost turn and find her standing there. For a brief moment, Ryan allowed himself to remember. Helen in her Army hospital scrubs, working long shifts as a nurse while he served as a military electrician, specializing in complex power systems for forward operating bases. They'd met during his second deployment when a power failure in the medical wing had brought him face to face with the blue-eyed nurse who would change his life. His technical skills had impressed her. Her compassion had humbled him. "Mrs. Henderson says we might not have school next year," Grace said, her small fingers carefully folding the wax paper around the remainder of her sandwich. "She says they might tear it down." "Is that true, Daddy?" Ryan froze, hand on the doorknob. He'd heard rumors about Lincoln Elementary being purchased by some corporation, but he dismissed them as just that, rumors. The school was the heart of their neighborhood, the one solid thing in Grace's life besides him. "I don't think so, sweetheart. Mrs. Henderson probably just heard some silly, grown-up talk." He knelt down to her level. "But even if something did happen to your school, I promise we'd figure it out together, okay?" In the hallway, Ryan helped Mrs. Abernathy from 3B with a leaking garbage bag. The elderly woman smiled gratefully. "Mitchell, you're an angel in work boots. That daughter of yours doing all right?" "She's perfect, Mrs. Abernathy. Getting all A's. The old woman's eyes softened. Helen would be proud of you both. You tell that little girl I've got some cookies for her later, if it's all right with you. This was his world. People helping people, neighbors sharing what little they had. Before leaving the building, Ryan stopped at his truck, opening the toolbox mounted in the bed. Inside, nestled among the electrical tools, was a small metal case. His field electronics kit from his military days. His fingers brushed over the specialized tools designed for complex circuitry and security systems. Sometimes he missed the challenge of those high-pressure situations, the feeling of knowing exactly what to do when others didn't. The military had given him skills far beyond basic electrical work, but civilian life rarely called for emergency power grid repairs or bypassing security systems. He closed the case, leaving it where it belonged, in the past. The Ashford Industries building loomed over downtown Cedar Falls like a glass and steel fortress. Ryan parked his battered pickup truck in the service entrance, noting how out of place it looked among the sleek sedans and luxury SUVs that filled the executive parking spaces. He'd been called in for an emergency electrical repair, something about a power surge that had knocked out half the building's systems during the night. The security guard, a heavy-set man named Joe, waved him through with a sympathetic smile. Good luck in there, Ryan. The boss lady's been tearing through people all morning, like a tornado through a trailer park. Joe called after him. Heard your kid goes to Lincoln, right? Ryan turned, a question in his eyes. Yeah, why? Joe looked uncomfortable, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. Just keep your ears open while you're upstairs. There's talk about that neighborhood. Before Ryan could ask what he meant, Joe was called away by another guard. The service elevator doors closed with a soft hydraulic sigh, leaving Ryan alone with a growing sense of unease. Victoria Ashford's corner office on the 30th floor of Ashford Industries' main tower offered a panoramic view of Cedar Falls that made the city look like a miniature model, tiny, manageable, subject to her will. At 42, Victoria had spent the last 5 years as CEO following her father Edward's death, doubling the company's market value through strategic acquisitions and aggressive development projects. This morning, she stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, tablet in hand, reviewing the latest financial projections for the Lincoln Heights Galleria project. The numbers were impressive. A projected 32% return on investment within the first 3 years, thousands of construction hundreds of permanent retail positions. Progress that would benefit everyone. At least, that's what the board needed to hear. A sharp pain pierced her right temple, making her wince. These headaches had been increasing in frequency over the past months. She reached for the prescription bottle on her desk, swallowing a pill dry before Thomas Harrington could arrive for their meeting. Thomas entered without knocking, a privilege he assumed as both board member and largest shareholder after Victoria herself. At 65, he carried himself with the easy confidence of old money and entrenched power. His family had been in chemicals manufacturing for generations before diversifying into real estate and finance. Victoria, he said by way of greeting, helping himself to a chair, I've been looking over the environmental impact statements for Lincoln Heights. Victoria turned from the window, her expression carefully neutral. And? They're too thorough. Thomas placed a thick binder on her desk. We're giving the community activists ammunition. This level of detail invites questions we don't need. Victoria picked up the binder. The Zoning Commission requires comprehensive assessments, Thomas. We can't just sketch something on a cocktail napkin. The commission requires what we tell them is required. He leaned forward. I've handled dozens of these projects. Trust me, the path of least resistance is always the best. Minimal documentation, maximum results. Victoria scrolled through something on her tablet. Is that what you did with the West Side project in 2010? The one that's now dealing with groundwater contamination lawsuits? Thomas's smile tightened. Ancient history, different regulatory environment. Different CEO, you mean? Victoria set down the tablet. My father may have allowed corner cutting, but I don't. This project will be done by the book. Your father understood business, Thomas replied, his tone sharpening. He knew when to follow rules and when to work around them. Before Victoria could respond, her assistant Melanie appeared at the door. Ms. Ashford, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a power issue at the West Building. Half the systems are down, including the server backups. It is concerned about data loss. Victoria frowned. Get someone over there immediately. We've called Mitchell Electric. They're sending someone this morning. Thomas stood, buttoning his jacket. You should delegate these operational issues, Victoria. Your father would never have concerned himself with a blown fuse. After he left, Victoria returned to the window, massaging her temple as the medication slowly took effect. On her desk, partially hidden by files, sat a framed photograph. Edward Ashford in a hospital bed, a much younger Victoria beside him, the only personal item in her precisely ordered office. Her phone buzzed with a text from her private physician. Blood test results in need to discuss. Call me. She dismissed the notification. Whatever it was could wait. The Lincoln Heights project couldn't. Victoria opened a secure folder on her tablet, reviewing the property acquisition reports for the Lincoln neighborhood. Her eyes paused on a line item. Lincoln Elementary School, built 2004. Current enrollment 302 students. Something about the date tickled her memory, but she couldn't place it. Melanie reappeared with Victoria's schedule for the day. Your 10 a.m. canceled, but the board wants a project update at 2. Also, HR needs your sign-off on the quarterly layoffs. Fine, send me the list. Victoria handed back the tablet. And Melanie, pull everything we have on Lincoln Elementary. Construction history, property records, the complete file. Any particular reason? Victoria turned back to the city spread below her, just being thorough. In the basement level of the Ashford West building, Ryan examined the electrical panel with practiced precision. The damage was extensive, surge protectors fried, breakers fused, evidence of extreme power fluctuation. This wasn't a normal surge. It looked more like the kind of damage he had seen in the military when systems were deliberately overloaded. As he worked, he noticed something odd, a small device attached to one of the secondary panels, something that didn't belong in a standard commercial electrical system. It resembled the monitoring equipment used in military installations to track power usage patterns. Ryan carefully disconnected it, pocketing the device for closer examination later. The sharp click of high heels on concrete announced someone's arrival. Ryan didn't need to turn around to know it was someone from management, probably annoyed about the outage, definitely going to ask when it would be fixed. You're the electrician, a crisp, cold voice stated. Ryan looked up from the electrical panel, wiping his hands on a shop rag that had seen better days. A blonde woman in a charcoal gray suit stood watching him, her expression suggesting she'd found something distasteful on the bottom of her expensive shoes. Yes, ma'am, he replied, keeping his voice level and professional. Ryan Mitchell, Mitchell Electric. How long will this take? I have a conference call with Goldman Sachs at 11. This building needs to be fully operational by then. Ryan returned to the panel. About 3 hours if everything goes smoothly. I need to trace the problem through multiple circuits to make sure it doesn't happen again. Victoria's eyebrows arched in disbelief. 3 hours is unacceptable. I understand the urgency, ma'am, but if I don't do this right, you could have a much bigger problem on your hands, Ryan said, turning back to the panel. Electrical fires don't care about conference calls. The silence that followed was so complete, Ryan could hear the hum of the building's HVAC system 2 floors above. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice had dropped to a temperature that could freeze water. Did you just lecture me about my own building? Do you have any idea who I am? Ryan kept working, his hands steady despite the tension radiating from the woman behind him. You're Victoria Ashford, CEO of Ashford Industries, and I'm Ryan Mitchell, the guy trying to keep your building from burning down. The honesty in his voice seemed to catch her off guard, but only for a moment. Victoria stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her expensive perfume mixing with the metallic scent of the electrical equipment. How long have you been doing this kind of work, Mr. Mitchell? She asked, her tone shifting to something that might have been curiosity if it weren't so clearly condescending. 8 years civilian side, Ryan replied. Before that, I was a power systems specialist with the Army Corps of Engineers. 3 deployments specialized in emergency repairs and security systems. This information seemed to give her pause. Military? That's not in your contractor file. Ryan didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that his service record opened some doors and closed others. Some clients assumed military training meant inflated prices. Others thought it guaranteed superior work. He preferred to let his results speak for themselves. Victoria's gaze dropped to his wrist, where Helen's watch caught the harsh basement lighting. The leather band was cracked and worn, the silver case tarnished with age and use. "Is that supposed to be a watch?" she asked, her voice taking on a tone of mock fascination. "It looks like something you'd find at a garage sale." Ryan's hand moved instinctively to cover the timepiece, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "It belonged to my wife," he said quietly, his voice carrying a warning that Victoria either didn't hear or chose to ignore. "Your wife," she repeated, tilting her head like a predator studying wounded prey. "Present tense or past tense, Mr. Mitchell?" "Past tense," he said finally, the words barely above a whisper. "She died 2 years ago." Victoria nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Cancer?" she asked, and when Ryan nodded, she made a soft sound that might have been sympathy if it weren't so obviously calculated. "That must have been expensive," she continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "Medical treatment, final expenses. Is that why you're still doing this kind of work? Because you're drowning in debt?" Ryan turned back to the electrical panel, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his multimeter. "The bills are manageable," he lied, his voice tight. Victoria laughed, a sound like glass breaking in an empty room. "Manageable? Is that what you call 30,000 in medical debt? Because that's what it says in the credit report I had my people pull on you this morning." The multimeter slipped from Ryan's fingers, clattering to the concrete floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. He turned slowly to face Victoria, his face pale with shock. "You had me investigated? Why would you do that?" "I make it a point to know who I'm dealing with," Victoria replied with a casual shrug, as if ordering background checks on service workers was as normal as checking the weather. "Especially when they're working in my building." Ryan stared at her, momentarily speechless. In his military career, he'd faced down insurgents with less callous disregard for basic human dignity than this woman showed in a casual conversation. Victoria checked her watch, a sleek, expensive timepiece that probably cost more than Ryan made in 6 months. "I'll expect updates on the hour, and Mr. Mitchell?" Her eyes flicked once more to Helen's watch. "Some advice. People with talent move forward. They don't cling to the past like that pathetic relic on your wrist. Your daughter deserves better." As Victoria's heels clicked away up the concrete stairs, Ryan stood frozen, her words about grace hitting him like physical blows. He bent to retrieve the fallen multimeter, now cracked from impact, another expense he couldn't afford. Taking a deep breath, he focused on the electrical panel. The work was familiar, logical, something he could control when everything else seemed to be falling apart. But as he traced circuits and tested connections, his mind kept returning to Victoria's casual cruelty and her mention of Lincoln Elementary. What did Ashford Industries want with his daughter's school? Across town in the top-floor office of Ashford Industries' downtown headquarters, Thomas Harrington reviewed the final plans for the Lincoln Heights development project. The architectural rendering showed a gleaming shopping complex where a shabby neighborhood currently stood. The centerpiece, a massive luxury mall, would sit precisely where Lincoln Elementary School currently educated 300 children from Cedar Falls working-class families. "The demolition timeline seems aggressive," noted Sandra Park, Ashford's head of development. "We're talking about displacing families, businesses, a school. The PR nightmare alone?" "The PR is Victoria's problem," Harrington interrupted, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "I handle the financials, and they look exceptional." The office door opened, and Victoria's assistant, Melanie, entered with a stack of reports. "Ms. Ashford is currently in the West Building, dealing with the electrical issues. She asked me to deliver these financial projections for the Lincoln project." "Personally checking on electrical problems?" Harrington raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound like our Victoria." After Melanie left, Harrington picked up the top report, flipping through it with practiced efficiency. "Victoria's getting soft," he muttered. "First, she questions the environmental impact. Now she's personally overseeing maintenance. This isn't the killer I mentored." He paused at a framed photograph on Victoria's desk, an old family picture that seemed out of place among the modern minimalist decor. In it, a much younger Victoria stood beside an older man in a hospital bed. Her smile in the photo lacked the sharp edges it had acquired in the years since. Harrington turned the frame face down with a casual flick of his wrist. Sentiment is a liability in this business. I thought I taught her that. In the basement level of the Ashford West building, Ryan Mitchell worked methodically through the damaged electrical system. The complexity of the failure went beyond a typical power surge. As a former military electrician, he'd seen similar patterns when systems were deliberately compromised, either for sabotage or surveillance. The small device he'd found attached to the secondary panel weighed heavily in his pocket. By mid-afternoon, Ryan had restored power to most of the building's critical systems. His hands moved with practiced precision, reconnecting circuits and replacing damaged components. The rhythm of the work calmed him, providing a temporary refuge from thoughts of Victoria Ashford's cutting remarks and the mysterious threat to Lincoln Elementary. From his toolbox, Ryan retrieved a specialized testing device from his military days, a small handheld scanner designed to detect unauthorized transmissions. He kept it more out of nostalgia than expectation he'd ever need it again. Glancing over his shoulder to ensure he was alone, Ryan passed the scanner over the electrical panel. The device emitted a soft beep, confirming his suspicions. Someone had installed monitoring equipment throughout the building's power system. "What are you doing?" Victoria's voice cut through the basement's silence like a blade. Ryan straightened quickly, pocketing the scanner. "Just checking for feedback loops in the system. They can cause recurring surges." Victoria stood at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed, her expression skeptical. "With that device, I don't see that in any standard electrician's toolkit." "Military surplus," Ryan replied, turning back to the panel. "More sensitive than commercial equipment." Victoria approached, her heels clicking deliberately on the concrete floor. "And what exactly did your military surplus equipment find, Mr. Mitchell?" Ryan weighed his options. Revealing his suspicions might jeopardize future contracts with Ashford Industries, but withholding information about potential security breaches carried its own risks. "Your system's been compromised," he said finally. "Someone installed monitoring devices on your power grid, sophisticated ones. They track usage patterns, system vulnerabilities, even data transfer rates if connected to the right network." Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of surprise on her otherwise composed face. Industrial espionage? Possibly, or a preparation for something else. Ryan reached into his pocket and held out the device he'd removed earlier. "This isn't commercial grade. It's closer to what we use for security assessments in sensitive installations overseas." Victoria took the device, examining it with narrowed eyes. "And you recognize this because—" "Part of my job in the Army was identifying and neutralizing security threats to critical infrastructure." Ryan closed the electrical panel. "I've swept the main junctions. Your system is clean now, but whoever placed these will notice they're gone." Victoria slipped the device into her jacket pocket. "I want a full report. Everything you found, every location, every potential vulnerability." She pulled out her phone, dialing quickly. "Melanie, cancel my afternoon and get me cybersecurity immediately." When she ended the call, Victoria fixed Ryan with a calculating stare. "Your contract specified basic electrical repairs, Mr. Mitchell, not security consulting." "Consider it a professional courtesy," Ryan replied, packing his tools, "or military habit. We don't leave vulnerabilities unaddressed." "And what do you want in return for this courtesy?" Ryan closed his toolbox with a definitive click. "Information. What's Ashford Industries planning for Lincoln Heights, specifically for Lincoln Elementary?" A flicker of surprise crossed Victoria's face, quickly replaced by her usual cool detachment. "That's corporate information, Mr. Mitchell. Not relevant to electrical repairs." "It is when my daughter attends that school." Ryan held her gaze steadily. "The security guard mentioned something this morning. There are rumors." Victoria checked her watch, her expression hardening. "Lincoln Heights is being redeveloped into a mixed-use commercial center. The details are confidential until the public announcement next week." She turned to leave, then paused. "Your daughter will need to change schools next semester. I suggest you start looking at alternatives." The casual way she delivered this life-altering news struck Ryan like a physical blow. "You're tearing down an entire school without warning? Where are 300 kids supposed to go? That's not Ashford's concern, Victoria replied, already climbing the stairs. Progress requires sacrifice, Mr. Mitchell. The community will adapt. Ryan stared after her, anger building in his chest. What about the families who can't adapt? Who can't drive their kids 20 miles to another district? Victoria paused on the stairs, looking back with cold indifference. Then perhaps they should have chosen a different neighborhood or a different income bracket. After she disappeared up the stairwell, Ryan stood alone in the basement, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The arrogance, the callous disregard for real people's lives. It was everything he'd fought against in his military career, just wearing a different uniform. As he packed the last of his tools, Ryan made a decision. Victoria Ashford might control Ashford Industries, but she didn't control him, and she wouldn't destroy his daughter's school without a fight. Outside Lincoln Elementary, the afternoon sunshine bathed the red brick building in warm light. Children's laughter drifted from the playground, where Grace and her classmates enjoyed their recess. Ryan sat in his truck, watching his daughter play hopscotch with two friends, her blonde hair catching the sun just like Helen's used to. A knock on his window startled him. Grace's teacher, Miss Carter, peered in with concern in her eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, everything okay?" Ryan rolled down the window, embarrassed at being caught watching from the parking lot. "Just had a job finish early. Thought I'd check in on Grace." Miss Carter's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "She's doing great. One of my brightest." "I heard a rumor," Ryan said, watching her expression carefully, "about the school being torn down. Is it true?" The smile vanished from Miss Carter's face. "We're not supposed to discuss it with parents yet. There's going to be an official announcement next week, but yes, it's true. Ashford Industries bought the land. We have until the end of the semester." "That's less than 2 months," Ryan said, the reality of the timeline hitting him like a physical blow. "I know it's not nearly enough time for families to make arrangements or for teachers to find new positions." She glanced over her shoulder at the children playing, her expression darkening. "Most of these kids don't have options, Mr. Mitchell. Their parents can't drive them 20 miles to the next district. They can't afford private school. They'll just fall through the cracks." Ryan thought about what Victoria had said about progress requiring sacrifice. But it was never the powerful who sacrificed. It was always people like these children, like Grace, who paid the price. "There must be something we can do," he said, more to himself than to Miss Carter. She gave him a look that mingled hope with resignation. "There's a community meeting tonight at the Cedar Falls Community Center. Some parents are trying to organize a protest, maybe get the city council to reconsider the zoning changes. But honestly, I don't think Ashford Industries is going to be stopped by a few angry parents." As Miss Carter returned to the playground, Ryan watched Grace lining up with her classmates. She spotted him in the truck and waved enthusiastically, her whole face lighting up at the unexpected sight of her father. He waved back, his heart simultaneously warming at her joy and breaking at the thought of telling her that her school would soon be gone, that her friends would be scattered across different districts, that Miss Carter might not be her teacher anymore, that the life they'd carefully rebuilt after Helen's death was about to be disrupted again. Ryan's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts, an unfamiliar number with the local area code. "Mitchell Electric," he answered. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Frank Thompson." The voice was deep, with the slight rasp of age. "I taught science at Lincoln Elementary for 30 years before retiring last spring. Miss Carter suggested I call you." "What can I do for you, Mr. Thompson?" "It's what I might be able to do for you, son. I understand your daughter attends Lincoln, and you're concerned about the Ashford development." Ryan straightened in his seat. "Very concerned. I've been gathering information on that property for years," Frank continued. "There's more to this story than a simple commercial development. If you're interested, I'll be at Mac's Diner in an hour, corner booth in the back." The call ended before Ryan could ask further questions. He stared at his phone, weighing the mysterious invitation against his afternoon appointments. Something in the old teacher's voice had conveyed urgency and knowledge. Ryan rescheduled his remaining jobs and headed toward Mac's Diner, a local institution that had served Cedar Falls for over 50 years. Inside, the familiar smell of coffee and fried onions filled the air. In the back corner booth sat an elderly man with silver hair and sharp eyes that assessed Ryan as he approached. Mr. Thompson? The older man nodded, gesturing to the seat across from him. Call me Frank. Everyone does. He pushed a manila folder across the table. This is why Ashford wants Lincoln Elementary, though they'll never admit it publicly. Ryan opened the folder to find yellowed newspaper clippings, property records, and what appeared to be soil sample reports dating back to the 1980s. I don't understand, Ryan said, flipping through the documents. What am I looking at? Frank leaned forward, lowering his voice. Before Lincoln Elementary was built, that land housed a Harrington chemical processing plant, operated from 1985 to 2003. When environmental regulations tightened, they shuttered the facility overnight and sold the property to a development company called Bluestone. Ryan scanned a property transfer document. Bluestone sold it to the school district a year later. Exactly, Frank tapped the document. What the school board didn't know, what no one knew except Harrington Chemical, was that the ground was contaminated with industrial solvents, heavy metals, and God knows what else. They buried the environmental assessment and pushed the sale through fast. Ryan looked up sharply. Are you saying my daughter's school was built on toxic land? The school itself sits on the clean section, Frank clarified. The worst contamination is in the wooded area behind the playground. But over time, these things migrate through soil and groundwater. He pulled out a more recent document. This is from a friend at the State Environmental Agency. Cancer rates in the Lincoln Heights neighborhood are 34% higher than the county average. Respiratory issues, 47% higher. Ryan's blood ran cold. Helen, my wife, she died of a rare aggressive cancer. We lived 3 blocks from the school. Frank's expression softened with sympathy. I'm sorry, son. I can't say there's a direct connection, but it's one hell of a coincidence. Ryan closed the folder, his mind racing. Why would Ashford want contaminated land? Wouldn't the liability be enormous? Unless no one ever finds out about the contamination. Frank sipped his coffee. If they demolish everything, cap the soil during construction, and build a shopping mall with acres of concrete parking lots, the problem literally gets buried. Meanwhile, Thomas Harrington, whose family owned Harrington Chemical, avoids a massive environmental cleanup and potential lawsuits from affected families. Harrington, the same Harrington who's on Ashford's board? Frank nodded grimly. The very same. He's been pushing this development through back channels for years. Waited until Edward Ashford died and his daughter took over. Victoria's ruthless, but she might not know the full story. Ryan thought of this cold executive who had mocked Helen's watch, who had dismissed the futures of 300 children as collateral damage for progress. Would she still proceed if she knew the truth about the contamination? Or was she complicit in the cover-up? The community meeting tonight, Ryan said, making a decision. I'll be there. At 7:00 p.m., the Cedar Falls Community Center was packed beyond capacity. Parents, teachers, and concerned citizens filled every seat, lined the walls, and spilled out into the hallway. The air was thick with tension and the mingled sense of coffee, perfume, and anxiety. Ryan found a spot near the back, standing behind the last row of chairs where he could see the makeshift stage at the front of the room. Frank Thompson had saved him a space, the manila folder of evidence between them. They had spent the afternoon reviewing the documents, building a case that might convince the city council to halt the development. A middle-aged man in a rumpled suit was speaking, his voice strained with the effort of remaining calm. Ashford Industries has already secured the necessary permits, he was saying, holding up a sheaf of papers. The zoning changes were approved in a closed session last month. The sale is final. Demolition is scheduled to begin in 6 weeks. The room erupted in angry voices, parents shouting questions and accusations. Ryan watched the chaos, feeling both part of it and somehow separate, as if he were observing the scene through a pane of glass. These people were fighting for their homes, their neighborhood, their children's school. But Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late, that Victoria Ashford had ensured their defeat before they even knew they were at war. What about our children? A woman demanded, rising from her seat in the front row. Where are they supposed to go to school? Ashford has suggested that the district can provide buses to Harrison Elementary, the man replied, looking uncomfortable. It's about 20 miles away. 20 miles? That's an hour each way with traffic. My kids are 6 and 8. They'd be leaving home at 600 a.m. And what about those of us who don't have cars? Someone else called out. How are we supposed to get to parent-teacher conferences? What if our kids get sick during the day? The questions continued, each one highlighting another aspect of the hardship that Ashford's plan would create. Ryan listened, mentally adding his own concerns to the growing list. Grace would lose the stability she desperately needed. She'd lose friends she'd made after Helen's death. She'd lose Miss Carter, who had been so patient with her during those first difficult months when Grace barely spoke at all. As the meeting progressed, various community members offered suggestions, legal challenges, public protests, media campaigns. But with each idea came the sobering reality that they were fighting a corporation with virtually unlimited resources, political connections, and a CEO who seemed entirely devoid of empathy. The door at the back of the room opened, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. Ryan turned to see Thomas Harrington entering, flanked by two Ashford Industries executives. The board member surveyed the room with barely concealed disdain before making his way to the front. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrington began, his cultured voice silencing the room without effort. "I understand your concerns. Change is always difficult. But the Lincoln Heights Galleria represents a $500 million investment in Cedar Falls. We're creating thousands of homes, increasing the tax base, and bringing world-class shopping and dining options to your community." "We don't need world-class shopping," someone shouted. "We need our homes and our school." Harrington smiled thinly. "Progress requires vision. Sometimes that means letting go of the past. I assure you the benefits of this development will far outweigh any temporary inconvenience." "Temporary inconvenience?" Ryan found himself speaking, the words rising from some deep well of anger he hadn't fully acknowledged until this moment. "Is that what you call destroying a community? Scattering families? Forcing children to spend 2 hours a day on buses?" Harrington's gaze locked onto Ryan, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "You're the electrician from this morning. Mitchell, isn't it?" "Ryan Mitchell. My daughter attends Lincoln Elementary." Ryan stepped forward, Frank's folder clutched in his hand. "And I think everyone here deserves to know the real reason Ashford Industries is so interested in this particular piece of land." A tense silence fell over the room. Harrington's smile didn't waver, but something hardened in his eyes. "By all means, Mr. Mitchell, share your expertise in commercial real estate development." "My expertise isn't in real estate," Ryan replied, opening the folder. "It's in identifying threats. For 6 years, I served with the Army Corps of Engineers, specializing in critical infrastructure security and environmental hazard assessment. And what I see in these documents is a deliberate attempt to cover up decades of environmental contamination." He held up one of the reports. "This land, the land where our children go to school, was once home to a Harrington chemical processing plant. When regulations tightened in 2003, they sold it quickly to a shell company that flipped it to the school district. What they didn't disclose was the toxic cocktail they left behind in the soil." Harrington's smile had vanished. "Those are serious allegations, Mr. Mitchell, and entirely unfounded. The property met all environmental standards when it was sold." "Did it?" Ryan produced another document. "According to this internal memo from Harrington Chemical, dated June 2003, your company manipulated the testing locations to avoid the most contaminated areas. The actual levels of chromium, lead, and industrial solvents were 10 times the legal limit." A gasp went through the crowd. Harrington's face had paled slightly, but he recovered quickly. "That document is clearly a forgery. Harrington Chemical has always maintained the highest environmental standards." "Then you won't mind if we conduct new tests," Frank Thompson interjected, standing beside Ryan. "Independent testing with proper oversight before any demolition begins." "The project timeline doesn't allow for additional testing," Harrington said dismissively. "The permits are approved. The contracts are signed." Ryan looked around the room, making eye contact with worried parents and teachers. "I think we all know why Mr. Harrington is so eager to cover this land with concrete as quickly as possible. It's not about bringing world-class shopping to Cedar Falls. It's about bearing evidence before anyone can connect the dots between Harrington Chemical's toxic legacy and the elevated cancer rates in our neighborhood." Silence fell over the room, heavy with the weight of this accusation. Then slowly a woman in the third row stood up. My husband died of lymphoma last year. We've lived next to the school for a decade. Another person stood. My son has been battling unexplained respiratory issues since kindergarten. One by one, community members rose, sharing stories of illness and loss that had never before been connected to a potential common cause. Harrington's composure cracked, his face flushing with anger. This is preposterous. You're inciting panic based on fabricated documents and coincidence. Ashford Industries will not be bullied by amateur conspiracy theories. Then prove us wrong, Ryan challenged. Delay demolition until independent environmental testing can be completed. If the land is clean, as you claim, you have nothing to worry about. Harrington straightened his tie, regaining control. Mr. Mitchell, you're clearly distressed about your daughter's school changing. That's understandable, but throwing around baseless accusations against respected corporations won't change the inevitable. This project is moving forward. He turned to address the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest you focus your energy on preparing for the transition rather than fighting progress. With that, Harrington and his executives turned to leave. As they reached the door, Ryan called after them. We'll take this to the media, the state environmental agency, the governor if necessary. Harrington paused, looking back with cold eyes. Be careful, Mr. Mitchell. Defamation has serious consequences for you and your daughter. After Harrington left, the community meeting continued with renewed urgency. People clustered around Ryan and Frank, examining the documents, sharing their stories, and organizing into action committees. Phone numbers were exchanged, protest signs planned, media contacts collected. For the first time since the meeting began, Ryan felt a glimmer of hope. They might be outmatched in resources and political connections, but they had something Ashford Industries and Thomas Harrington didn't: the truth. As Ryan prepared to leave, Diane, a single mother whose daughter was Grace's best friend, approached him. That was incredible, Ryan. I had no idea you had a military background in environmental assessment. It was part of my job, Ryan said modestly, identifying threats, protecting people. Old habits die hard, I guess. Well, Harrington looked like he'd seen a ghost when you started citing those documents. I think you struck a nerve. Ryan nodded, but concern shadowed his thoughts. That's what worries me. Men like Harrington don't give up easily. And he made it personal at the end. You're not alone in this, Diane assured him, squeezing his arm. The whole community is behind you now. As Ryan drove home, his truck's headlights cutting through the darkness, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just painted a target on his back. Victoria Ashford had dismissed him as an insignificant electrician this morning. After tonight, Ashford Industries would see him as a threat. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Security office, Ashford Tower, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Oh, I am. Ryan smiled grimly. It seemed Victoria Ashford wanted a second round. This time, he'd be ready. Ryan arrived at Ashford Tower precisely at 9 a.m., his truck looking even more out of place in the visitor parking area than it had the day before. The morning sun glinted off the glass facade of the building, turning it into a towering mirror that reflected the clear blue sky, the same shade as Grace's eyes, the same shade as Helen's. He'd spent half the night reviewing Frank Thompson's documents, searching for any weaknesses in their evidence. The other half he'd spent wondering what Victoria Ashford wanted. Her text message had been typically terse, offering no clue whether she was planning to threaten him, fire his company, or perhaps, though he doubted it, actually listen. The security desk in the lobby was staffed by a different guard today, a younger man with military straight posture who examined Ryan's ID with exaggerated thoroughness. Ms. Ashford is expecting you, the guard said finally, handing Ryan a visitor badge. Security office, sublevel 2. Take that elevator. He pointed to a private elevator separate from the bank that served the upper floors. You'll need this key card. The elevator doors closed with a soft hydraulic sigh, sealing Ryan in polished steel. As the car descended, he mentally prepared for confrontation. Victoria had seemed the type to double down rather than back off. The security office was not what Ryan expected. Instead of the sterile corporate environment he'd anticipated, the space resembled a high-tech command center, multiple screens displaying building systems, security camera feeds, and what appeared to be real-time monitoring of electronic access throughout the Ashford properties. Victoria stood at a central console, engaged in quiet conversation with a man in a tailored suit whose bearing screamed ex-military. She looked up as Ryan entered, her expression unreadable. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for coming. Her tone was neutral, professional, entirely different from their basement encounter. This is Julian Reeves, our head of corporate security. Reeves extended his hand, his grip firm but not aggressive. Former Navy SEAL, he said, a hint of question in his voice. Army Corps of Engineers, Ryan replied. Power systems and infrastructure security. Reeves nodded, a glimmer of professional respect in his eyes. Good catch yesterday with the monitoring devices. Most electricians would have missed them or assumed they were part of the standard system. Victoria gestured toward a side room with glass walls. Let's talk privately. The smaller room contained a conference table and 4 chairs. On the table sat the monitoring device Ryan had discovered, now partially disassembled, alongside a tablet displaying technical specifications. Our cybersecurity team analyzed the device you found, Victoria began, taking a seat across from Ryan. It's sophisticated, military-grade components but custom-built, not something you'd find on the commercial market. I told you that yesterday, Ryan said, leaning back in his chair. What I'm curious about is why Ashford Industries called a simple electrician to the security office to tell him what he already knows. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly at his tone. Because we found 11 more devices throughout our properties, all in electrical systems you personally serviced over the past 6 months. The accusation hung in the air between them. Ryan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. You think I planted them? It wasn't a question. The timing is suspicious, Victoria replied, and suddenly you appear at a community meeting with classified Harrington chemical documents, positioning yourself as an environmental expert. You can understand my concern. Ryan leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. I didn't plant those devices, and if someone's trying to frame me, I'd be asking why. Who benefits from monitoring Ashford Industries' power consumption? Who has something to hide? That's what I intend to find out. Victoria slid a document across the table. This is a termination of services agreement. Mitchell Electric will no longer work with any Ashford properties. You'll be compensated for completed jobs, of course. Ryan left the document untouched. You're firing me because I spoke up about the contamination. I'm terminating our business relationship because you're either involved in corporate espionage or being used by someone who is. Victoria's voice remained coolly professional. Either way, you're a security risk. And the Lincoln Heights project? The contaminated soil that's making children sick? Is that a security risk too? Something flickered across Victoria's face, too brief to interpret. The Lincoln Heights development has passed all required environmental assessments. The documents you presented last night were obvious forgeries. Were they? Ryan pushed back from the table and stood. Then you won't mind delaying demolition for independent testing. If I'm wrong, you can proceed with your luxury mall. If I'm right, well, I think we both know what it means if I'm right. Victoria stood as well, her height and heels putting them nearly eye to eye. Mr. Mitchell, you seem intelligent despite your career choices. So let me be clear. Ashford Industries will not be derailed by unsubstantiated allegations. We have the permits. We have the political support. We have resources you can't imagine. And I have the truth, Ryan replied simply. Let's see which one matters more in the end. As he turned to leave, Victoria's voice stopped him. One more thing, Mr. Mitchell. Last night, Thomas Harrington acted as an individual board member, not as an official representative of Ashford Industries. His comments and any perceived threats were not authorized by this company. Ryan looked back, surprised by what sounded almost like an apology. Is that concern for my welfare, Ms. Ashford? Or covering your legal bases? Victoria's expression remained impassive. Consider it free advice. Harrington takes business personally. I suggest you watch your back. Ryan held her gaze for a moment longer. And what about you, Ms. Ashford? Do you take business personally? I take results personally. She returned to her seat, effectively dismissing him. Goodbye, Mr. Mitchell. I'm sure our paths will cross again. The community meeting that evening at Cedar Falls Public Library drew an even larger crowd than the previous night. News of Ryan's confrontation with Harrington had spread, and people arrived eager for updates and action plans. The conference room buzzed with nervous energy as parents, teachers, and concerned citizens filled every available space. Ryan stood at the front beside Frank Thompson, facing the crowd. On a table beside them lay copies of the environmental documents, alongside a detailed map of Lincoln Heights, with the old chemical plant boundaries outlined in red. "First, thank you all for coming," Ryan began, his voice carrying easily, a skill honed during military briefings. "As most of you know, last night we presented evidence that Lincoln Elementary was built on land previously occupied by a Harrington chemical plant, land that may still be contaminated with industrial chemicals." A murmur ran through the crowd. Ryan continued, "Today we're organizing into action teams. We need people handling media outreach, legal research, political pressure, and most importantly, independent environmental testing." Frank stepped forward, pointing to the map. "We've identified key testing locations based on the original plant layout and groundwater flow patterns. But we need to move quickly. Ashford Industries isn't going to wait while we build our case." A woman in the front row raised her hand. "I'm a reporter with the Cedar Falls Gazette. Are you willing to go on record with these allegations?" "Absolutely," Ryan confirmed. "This isn't about stopping progress or fighting corporate interests. It's about protecting our children and getting answers about what might be making people in our neighborhood sick." As the meeting progressed, people volunteered for various roles. Diane organized a phone tree to ensure rapid communication. A local lawyer offered pro bono advice on filing injunctions. 3 different environmental testing companies were contacted for quotes. The community was mobilizing with remarkable efficiency. Near the end of the meeting, the library door opened and a collective hush fell over the room. Victoria Ashford stood in the doorway, alone and without the corporate armor of her usual business attire. Instead, she wore dark jeans and a simple blouse, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its severe bun. Ryan stared in disbelief. After their confrontation that morning, Victoria Ashford was the last person he expected to see at a community organizing meeting. She moved through the crowd, which parted silently before her, until she stood at the front, facing Ryan. "Ms. Ashford," he acknowledged, his voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "I'm not here officially," she said, her voice lower than her usual commanding tone. "What I'm about to say isn't coming from Ashford Industries' CEO." The room held its collective breath. Victoria turned to address the crowd. "I've reviewed the environmental concerns raised about the Lincoln Heights project. As a precautionary measure, I've ordered a comprehensive independent assessment of the site before any demolition begins." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Ryan studied Victoria's face, searching for the catch, the corporate doublespeak that would render this apparent concession meaningless. "The assessment will be conducted by Meridian Environmental Services, a third-party firm with no previous relationship with Ashford Industries. Their findings will be made public." Victoria paused, her eyes briefly meeting Ryan's. "Construction activities will be delayed until the assessment is complete." A cheer started somewhere in the back of the room, quickly spreading until the entire gathering was on its feet, applauding. Victoria remained stoic, accepting neither the celebration nor the few skeptical glares from those who suspected a corporate trick. When the noise subsided, she continued, "This is not an admission that the allegations are true. It's a recognition that public health concerns should be addressed transparently. If the site is clean, the project will proceed as planned. If contamination is found, appropriate measures will be taken." With that, she turned to leave, but Ryan stepped forward, blocking her path. "Why the change of heart?" he asked quietly, so only she could hear. Victoria's expression remained carefully composed. "I told you this morning I take results personally, bad press and community resistance that are bad results." "This isn't about public relations," Ryan challenged. "Something changed between this morning and now." For a brief moment, something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or a deeper calculation. 9 o'clock, Riverside Bistro. "Come alone if you want the real story." Then louder for others to hear, "Good night, Mr. Mitchell. We'll be in touch about the testing schedule." She departed as suddenly as she had arrived, leaving the community meeting in a state of cautious celebration tinged with confusion. People surrounded Ryan, asking questions he couldn't answer, offering congratulations he wasn't sure he deserved. "What just happened?" Diane asked, appearing at his elbow. Did we actually win? Ryan watched the door through which Victoria had disappeared. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Riverside Bistro occupied the top floor of Cedar Falls' only luxury hotel, offering panoramic views of the city and the river that gave it its name. Ryan felt distinctly out of place as the maitre d' led him through the dimly lit restaurant, past tables of well-dressed diners who seemed to evaluate his worth based on his clothing. Victoria waited in a private alcove, a glass of red wine in front of her. She had changed into a simple black dress, elegant but understated. Without her usual corporate armor, she looked different, still formidable, but somehow more human. "Mr. Mitchell," she greeted him as he took the seat across from her. "Thank you for coming. Your announcement at the meeting was unexpected," Ryan said, declining the waiter's offer of wine with a shake of his head. "I'm curious about the real motivation." Victoria waited until the waiter had retreated before responding. "I've been reviewing our plans for Lincoln Heights. In light of the passionate community response, I'm considering some modifications that might address some of your concerns." Ryan studied her face, looking for signs of the cold corporate predator he'd encountered in the basement. Instead, he found something more complex. Calculation, yes, but also what appeared to be genuine consideration. "What kind of modifications?" "We could preserve the school building itself," Victoria offered, "incorporate it into the development as a community center or educational facility of some kind. The children would still need to relocate to Harrison Elementary, but the building and its history would remain intact." Ryan frowned. "The building isn't what matters. It's the community, the teachers, the students, the programs. You can't preserve that by keeping an empty shell and filling it with shops." Victoria took a sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving his face. "What if we built a new school first, before demolishing the old one? On the western edge of the development, with state-of-the-art facilities, large enough to accommodate all the current students, plus room for growth." The offer was unexpected and admittedly better than Ryan had anticipated, but something about it felt wrong, like a magician's misdirection. And the rest of the neighborhood, the homes, the small businesses? Victoria's expression tightened slightly. The residential and commercial zones would still need to be cleared for the main development, but with adequate relocation assistance. "Which means the community still gets destroyed," Ryan interrupted, "just with a shiny new school building as a consolation prize." Victoria leaned forward, her voice taking on an edge of frustration. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm trying to find a middle ground here. Ashford Industries has invested millions in planning and preparation for this project. The board will not simply walk away from it. This is a significant concession." Ryan considered her words, weighing them against what he'd learned about the property's history and the potential contamination. If Harrington was hiding information from Victoria, as Frank had suggested, then perhaps this dinner was more complicated than a simple negotiation tactic. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked, changing tack. "The compromise, the secret meeting, this isn't normal corporate procedure." Victoria seemed taken aback by the directness of the question. She picked up her wine glass, then set it down without drinking, a small gesture that nonetheless revealed uncharacteristic uncertainty. "I've been reevaluating certain aspects of the project and certain assumptions I've made." "What assumptions?" Victoria studied him for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Do you know why I had you investigated, Mr. Mitchell, before you came to work on the electrical systems in our West building?" Ryan shook his head, confused by the apparent change of subject. "Your name appeared in my father's personal files. Files I inherited when he died 5 years ago. He had a note about helping with medical expenses for a Helen Mitchell. I was curious about the connection." Ryan felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. "What? That's impossible. My wife never met your father." Victoria reached into a small handbag beside her and withdrew a photograph, sliding it across the table. "Are you sure about that?" Ryan stared at the photo in disbelief. It showed Edward Ashford, an older man with Victoria's same blonde hair and sharp features, sitting in what appeared to be a hospital room. Beside him, checking something on a medical chart, was Helen, unmistakably Helen with her blue eyes and gentle smile, wearing scrubs and a badge that identified her as a nurse at Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital. "This was taken about 8 years ago," Victoria said quietly. "My father had his first heart attack that year. He was at Cedar Falls Memorial for 2 weeks. According to his journals, your wife was his primary nurse. Ryan picked up the photo with trembling hands, his mind racing to process this unexpected connection. Helen had worked at Memorial, certainly, but she'd never mentioned caring for Edward Ashford, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in Cedar Falls. I don't understand, he said finally. What does this have to do with Lincoln Heights? With you showing up at the community meeting or inviting me here tonight? Victoria's expression softened, revealing a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. My father changed after that hospital stay. He'd always been driven, ambitious, sometimes ruthless in business, but something happened during those 2 weeks. In his journals, he wrote about conversations with Nurse Helen that made him reconsider his priorities, his legacy. She took a deep breath as if the next words were difficult to say. The land where Lincoln Elementary now stands, my father's company bought it from Harrington Chemical and sold it to the school district at a significant loss. It was one of his last major decisions before stepping back from day-to-day operations due to his health. At the time, I thought it was a sign of weakness, a sentimental mistake. Ryan's mind was reeling. The connections were too strange, too coincidental. Helen caring for Edward Ashford, Ashford buying the contaminated property from Harrington and then selling it to the school district. And now, years later, Victoria Ashford and Thomas Harrington trying to buy it back. Your father knew the land was contaminated, Ryan said, the pieces falling into place. He bought it to keep Harrington from developing it without proper cleanup. And he sold it to the school district because the law required more thorough environmental testing for school sites than for commercial development, Victoria finished. Yes, at least that's what I've recently come to suspect. My father never explicitly mentioned contamination in his journals, but there are references to Harrington's mess and protecting the future. Ryan sat back, trying to process the implications of what Victoria was revealing. If Edward Ashford had known about the contamination and sold the land to the school district to force proper testing and cleanup, it would explain why Harrington had contested the sale. It would also explain why he was now so eager to reacquire the property and develop it before the contamination spread further and became impossible to hide. Does Harrington know that you know about this? Ryan asked, suddenly concerned for Victoria's safety as well as his own. Victoria's expression darkened. No, and I'd prefer to keep it that way until I understand exactly what happened and what we're dealing with now. Harrington has been pushing hard for this project from the beginning. He's the one who identified the site, who convinced the board it was ideal for the Galleria concept. I never questioned why he was so fixated on that specific location until I found my father's journals last week. A heavy silence fell between them as Ryan contemplated the strange twist of fate that had connected his wife to Victoria's father and now connected him to Victoria herself in this high-stakes conflict over Lincoln Heights. What are you going to do? He asked finally. Victoria's gaze was direct, her voice steadier now. I'm going to find out exactly what Harrington is hiding, and then I'm going to decide whether Lincoln Heights proceeds as planned, is modified, or is canceled entirely. And in the meantime, the hearing was just a formality. Construction is scheduled to start in less than a month. I can delay the project for at least 60 days without raising too many questions. After that, it becomes more difficult. Ryan nodded, understanding the implied timeline. 2 months to uncover the truth about the contamination, about Harrington's involvement, about what Edward Ashford had known and done 8 years ago. Why tell me all this? Why not just delay the project and conduct your investigation privately? Victoria's expression turned wry. Because you're not going to stop fighting, are you? You and your community group will keep protesting, keep generating media attention, keep demanding answers. And that complicates my ability to investigate discreetly. So this is about damage control. Partly, Victoria admitted, but it's also because I think you actually care about doing the right thing regardless of the bond, and that's rare in my experience. She reached across the table, not quite touching his hand, but close enough that he could see the fine tremor in her fingers. I'm not asking you to trust me, Mr. Mitchell. I'm asking for time. 60 days to find out what's really happening with that land, with Harrington, with my father's legacy. In return, I'll share whatever I discover with you, and we'll decide together how to proceed. Ryan was struck by the unexpectedness of her proposal. Not a bribe, not a threat, but a tentative alliance. It was the last thing he'd expected when he walked into the restaurant. And if I refuse? If we keep fighting publicly? Then I'll still investigate, but I'll do it while managing a PR crisis and dealing with board pressure to move forward regardless. It will be harder, slower, and less likely to result in the outcome I suspect we both want, which is the truth. Victoria said simply, and whatever action that truth demands. Ryan considered her offer. Everything in his experience told him not to trust Victoria Ashford, the woman who had mocked his grief and threatened his community. But the photograph of Helen with Edward Ashford changed things. If Helen had somehow influenced the elder Ashford's decision to purchase and repurpose that land, if her compassion had reached even a wealthy, powerful man at the end of his career, then perhaps there was hope for finding common ground with his daughter as well. 60 days, Ryan said finally. But I need something concrete to take back to the community group, something to justify pausing our efforts. Victoria nodded. I'll issue a public statement tomorrow announcing a comprehensive review of the Lincoln Heights project with specific attention to community impact and alternative approaches. I'll commit to no demolition or construction activity for at least 60 days while the review is conducted. And Harrington, he won't just accept this delay. A cold smile flickered across Victoria's face, a reminder that beneath the unexpected vulnerability, she was still a formidable corporate executive. Leave Harrington to me. He may be a board member, but I'm still the CEO. As they finalized the details of their unusual agreement, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a deal with the devil, or at least with someone whose interest might ultimately prove incompatible with his own. But the connection to Helen, the possibility that she had unknowingly set these events in motion years ago, made it impossible for him to simply walk away. When he finally left the restaurant, the October night air cool against his face, Ryan found himself looking up at the stars and wondering what Helen would think of all this. Would she approve of his tentative alliance with Victoria Ashford? Would she understand his willingness to pause the public fight in exchange for a chance at a more comprehensive victory? He couldn't know for certain, but he could almost hear her voice, calm and practical as always. Sometimes the right path isn't the obvious one. Sometimes you have to trust that kindness will find its way back to you, even from unexpected sources. With that thought providing some measure of comfort, Ryan headed home, unaware that his agreement with Victoria had just set in motion events that would test both of them in ways neither could anticipate. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Ryan's uncertain mood as he prepared Grace for school. He'd spent a restless night considering his conversation with Victoria, weighing the risks and potential benefits of their agreement. By morning, he still wasn't entirely sure he'd made the right choice, but he was committed to seeing it through. "You look tired, Daddy," Grace observed as she munched her toast. "Did you have bad dreams?" Ryan smiled, amazed as always by his daughter's perceptiveness. "Just a lot on my mind, sweetheart. Grown-up stuff about your school." Grace nodded solemnly. "Miss Carter says grown-ups have to make hard choices sometimes, but it's important to choose what's right, not what's easy." The echo of Helen's philosophy in their daughter's words brought a lump to Ryan's throat. "That's very wise. Did Miss Carter tell you that?" "No," Grace said, her blue eyes, Helen's eyes, regarding him seriously. "Mommy did, I remember." Ryan swallowed hard, reaching across the table to squeeze her small hand. "She was right, and we're going to make sure we make the right choices about your school." "Okay." Grace nodded, apparently satisfied, and returned to her breakfast. Ryan watched her, marveling at the resilience of children, at their ability to carry forward the wisdom of those they'd lost, while still embracing the present moment with full hearts. His phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Emergency meeting at my place, 9 major development with Ashford." Ryan frowned, wondering if Victoria had already issued her promised statement about reviewing the Lincoln Heights project. It seemed fast, given their conversation had only ended a few hours ago. After dropping Grace at school, he headed to Diane's small bungalow on the eastern edge of the Lincoln Heights neighborhood. Several cars were already parked outside, and when Diane answered the door, her expression was a mixture of excitement and concern. "You're not going to believe this," she said, leading him into her living room, where a half-dozen other parents and community members were gathered around a laptop. Emma Chen from the Gazette sent this over an hour ago. It's going live on their website at noon. Ryan leaned over to see the screen, which displayed a draft news article with the headline, "Breaking, Ashford Industries CEO announces comprehensive review of Lincoln Heights project." The article quoted a statement from Victoria nearly identical to what she promised Ryan the night before. A full review of the project, no demolition or construction for at least 60 days, and a commitment to exploring alternative approaches that would better address community concerns. "This is unexpected," one of the other parents said, clearly skeptical. "Why would she suddenly change course like this?" "It's a delay tactic," another suggested. "They're hoping we'll lose momentum, that public interest will fade." "Or they've found a problem with the project," Diane countered, "something that requires fixing before they can proceed." Ryan remained silent, uncomfortable with his insider knowledge, yet unwilling to break his agreement with Victoria by revealing their conversation. Instead, he studied the full statement, looking for any discrepancies or hidden meanings. "What do you think, Ryan?" Diane asked, drawing him into the discussion. "You spoke at the hearing. Do you think this is genuine?" Ryan chose his words carefully. "I think it gives us time, which is what we needed. Whether it's genuine or not, we can use these 60 days to build stronger opposition, gather more information, and prepare legal challenges if necessary." The others nodded, seemingly satisfied with his assessment. As the discussion turned to organizing a community meeting to discuss this new development, Ryan's phone buzzed again, an unknown number this time. Stepping into Diane's kitchen for privacy, he answered cautiously. "Hello? Mr. Mitchell, this is Melanie Ward, Ms. Ashford's executive assistant." Victoria's assistant's voice was tense, almost whispering. "I need to speak with you urgently, in person. It's about Ms. Ashford in the Lincoln Heights situation. I just saw the statement about the project review. Isn't that what we discussed last night?" "Yes, but there's been a complication. Ms. Ashford collapsed this morning at the office. She's been taken to Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital." Ryan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "What happened? Is she all right?" "The doctors are saying it's exhaustion and dehydration, but..." Melanie paused, her voice dropping even lower. "I found her office in disarray, papers everywhere, her computer screen smashed, and a note on her desk that just said, 'Mitchell, danger.' I think she was trying to warn you about something." "Harrington," Ryan said, the name escaping before he could stop himself. "Did he have access to her office last night or this morning?" "Mr. Harrington has access to the entire building," Melanie confirmed. "But why would he? What's going on, Mr. Mitchell?" Ryan's mind was racing, trying to process this new development. If Victoria had collapsed or been made to collapse shortly after their meeting, it suggested that perhaps Harrington had discovered their conversation or Victoria's investigation into the contamination issue. "I need to see her," he said, making a decision. "Which hospital? Which room?" "Cedar Falls Memorial, room 412. But Mr. Mitchell, be careful. Security reported a man watching the hospital entrance. Someone they didn't recognize who left when approached." The warning sent another chill through Ryan. This was escalating from a community dispute over a development project into something much darker. "Thank you for calling, Melanie. Please don't tell anyone else that you've contacted me." After hanging up, Ryan rejoined the group in Diane's living room, his mind working furiously to formulate a plan. He needed to get to the hospital to see Victoria and find out what she discovered that had potentially put both of them in danger. But he also needed to ensure Grace's safety, especially if Harrington or someone working for him was targeting people connected to the Lincoln Heights opposition. "I need to go," he announced, interrupting the ongoing discussion. "Something's come up with a client. Diane, can I talk to you privately for a minute?" In Diane's hallway, away from the others, Ryan kept his voice low. "I need a favor. A big one. Can Grace stay with you today after school? Maybe overnight?" Diane's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Of course, but what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ryan hesitated, torn between his promise to Victoria and his need to protect his friends. "I can't explain everything right now, but I think there might be something dangerous happening with the Lincoln Heights situation. Something beyond a normal development dispute." Diane's expression shifted from surprise to concern. Ryan, what have you gotten yourself into? Hopefully a chance to save the school and the neighborhood. But I need to know Grace is safe while I figure it out. Diane studied his face for a moment, then nodded. Okay, I'll pick her up from school and bring her here. Sarah will be thrilled to have a sleepover, but you have to promise to call me tonight and explain what's really going on. Ryan agreed, grateful for Diane's trust and friendship. As he left her house and headed for his truck, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something far more complicated and dangerous than a fight to save a neighborhood school. The connection between Helen and Edward Ashford, the contaminated land, Harrington's determination to develop the property, and now Victoria's collapse. It all pointed to stakes much higher than he'd initially understood. Pulling out his phone, he called Mrs. Abernathy, explaining that Grace would be staying with her friend Sarah that night and asking her to let Grace know if she stopped by the apartment. Then, with a deep breath to steady his nerves, Ryan headed for Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital, the place where, 8 years earlier, his wife had apparently set in motion a chain of events that was now coming full circle. Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital hadn't changed much in the 2 years since Helen's death. The same antiseptic smell hung in the air, mingling with the aroma of mediocre coffee from the cafeteria. The same fluorescent lights cast their unforgiving glow on pale green walls. Even the squeaking of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum sounded exactly as Ryan remembered it, a soundtrack to the worst days of his life. He stepped off the elevator on the 4th floor, his heart hammering against his ribs. The parallels were impossible to ignore. 2 years ago, he had walked these same halls to visit Helen. Now he was here for Victoria Ashford, a woman who had entered his life as an enemy, but had somehow become, what, an ally? A co-conspirator? Something more complicated than either label could capture. The nurses' station was busy, staff members moving with practiced efficiency. Ryan hesitated, suddenly unsure of his next move. A memory surfaced. Helen in her nurse's uniform, explaining her approach to difficult patients. You can't help someone who doesn't want help. But sometimes the ones who push you away the hardest are the ones who need you most. Ryan approached the nurse's station, clearing his throat. Excuse me, I'm here to see Victoria Ashford in room 412. The nurse glanced up, assessing him with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to filtering appropriate visitors from potential problems. Are you family? No, I'm a business associate, Ryan improvised, knowing that community activists fighting against her corporate development wouldn't get him through the door. The nurse looked skeptical. Ms. Ashford is under doctor's orders to rest. Only family and approved visitors. Ryan's heart sank. Before he could argue further, a familiar voice spoke from behind him. It's all right, Nurse Jenkins. Mr. Mitchell is on the approved list. Ryan turned to find Melanie standing there, her professional composure slightly frayed around the edges. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her typically immaculate blouse was creased as if she'd been sitting in an uncomfortable chair for hours. She's awake? Ryan asked as the nurse reluctantly nodded her permission. In and out, Melanie replied, leading him down the hallway. The doctors say it's mostly exhaustion combined with mild dehydration, but there are running tests to rule out other causes. She's been pushing herself too hard for months. She paused outside room 412, lowering her voice. Mr. Mitchell, before you go in, she may not be what you're expecting. Victoria Ashford doesn't do vulnerability well. Just be prepared. With that cryptic warning, Melanie opened the door and gestured for Ryan to enter. The room was private. Of course, Ryan doubted Victoria would accept anything less. Muted sunlight filtered through partially closed blinds, casting soft stripes across the standard-issue hospital bed. Victoria lay against the raised mattress, an IV inserted into her left arm, a monitor quietly tracking her vital signs. Without her perfect makeup and tailored clothing, she looked younger, more human. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and the hospital gown did nothing to project the corporate power she typically wielded like a weapon. She turned as Ryan entered, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. You actually came. Ryan moved closer to the bed, uncertain of the proper protocol for this bizarre situation. Melanie called. She said you collapsed and that you might have been trying to warn me about something. Victoria's gaze shifted to the door where Melanie hovered uncertainly. Give us a few minutes, would you? And make sure no one disturbs us. After Melanie left, closing the door behind her, Victoria attempted to sit up straighter, wincing slightly at the movement. I wasn't sure she'd contact you. Melanie has her own ideas about what's best for me, which apparently now include involving you in this mess. What happened? Ryan asked, deciding directness was the best approach. Melanie mentioned finding your office in disarray and a note with my name on it. Victoria's expression tightened. Someone was in my office last night after our dinner. I arrived early this morning and found my files scattered, my computer accessed. The environmental reports I'd been reviewing were missing. Harrington? Almost certainly, though it would be nearly impossible to prove. He has legitimate access to the building and my office for board matters. She rubbed her temple, a gesture so human and unguarded that Ryan found himself momentarily thrown off balance. I was attempting to compile what information I still had to warn you that he might know about our arrangement when I apparently collapsed. Melanie found me on the floor. Ryan moved a chair closer to the bed and sat down, processing this new information. So Harrington knows we met, and he knows you're investigating the contamination issue. It appears so, which means both of us may be in danger. Victoria's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing a mild inconvenience rather than a potentially life-threatening situation. Thomas Harrington has built his entire career on burying the environmental crimes of his family's company. He won't let anyone expose them now, not even me. Ryan thought of Grace, safely with Diane for the moment, but still vulnerable if Harrington decided to target her father's loved ones. We need to go public with what we know now before he can do any more damage. Victoria shook her head, the movement causing her to wince again. We don't have enough concrete evidence yet, just suspicions and fragments of information. If we move too soon, Harrington will simply deny everything, use his considerable resources to discredit us, and continue with the project once the 60-day review period ends. Then what do? Wait for him to come after us again? Victoria's lips curved in a small, determined smile that reminded Ryan of the corporate CEO he'd first encountered in the basement. No, we find proof, conclusive, undeniable proof of the contamination and Harrington's knowledge of it. He's already taken your environmental reports. Not all of them. Victoria's voice dropped lower, a hint of triumph coloring her words. My father kept backups of everything important. Physical copies stored in a safe deposit box that only I can access, including, I believe, the original environmental assessment of the Lincoln Heights property from when he purchased it from Harrington Chemical. Ryan leaned forward, hope stirring despite his caution. Where's this safe deposit box? First Cedar Bank, downtown branch. I was planning to go there this morning before Melanie found me on the floor. Victoria glanced at the IV in her arm with undisguised frustration. The doctors insist on keeping me here for observation until tomorrow at least. Ryan understood her implication immediately. You want me to go to the bank? Would they even give me access to your father's safe deposit box? Not without me, but we don't have time to wait. If we don't get those documents today, Harrington might find a way to block our access to them entirely. So what's the plan? Victoria studied him for a long moment, as if making a final assessment before committing to a course of action. I need to get out of here, and I need your help to do it. Ryan blinked, taken aback by the directness of her request. You want to break out of the hospital? Victoria, you collapsed a few hours ago. It was just exhaustion, she dismissed, already pulling at the tape securing her IV. Nothing more dramatic. And this is too important to delay. There are other ways. I could contact Frank Thompson, bring him into our confidence. He has connections, might be able to help with... No, Victoria's voice was sharp. The fewer people who know about this, the better. Harrington has eyes and ears everywhere. I've learned that the hard way. Ryan watched as she carefully removed the IV needle from her arm, pressing a tissue against the small wound to stop the bleeding. Her determination was evident in every movement, despite the slight tremor in her hands. This is a terrible idea, he said, even as he found himself moving to help her. The doctors wanted to keep you for observation for a reason. I've pushed myself harder than this for quarterly earnings calls, Victoria replied dryly. Now there's a service elevator at the end of this hallway. It leads to the loading dock where supply deliveries come in. Can you get us there without attracting attention? Ryan sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing with Ryan. I'll check the hallway. Wait here. He stepped outside, finding the corridor temporarily empty as nurses tended to patients in other rooms. Melanie was nowhere to be seen, probably getting coffee or handling calls for her boss. Ryan returned to the room. Coast is clear for now, but you can't walk out in a hospital gown. Victoria pointed to a small closet. Melanie brought me some clothes earlier. Nothing suitable for a board meeting, but better than this. Ryan retrieved the simple jeans and blouse, then turned his back while Victoria changed. The sounds of fabric rustling and soft grunts of effort reminded him that despite her determination, she was still recovering from whatever had caused her collapse. "Ready," she announced a moment later. Ryan turned to find Victoria dressed, though significantly less polished than her usual appearance. Her face was pale, a bruise visible where the ivy had been, but her eyes were clear and focused. "You look," he hesitated. "Terrible, I know." She attempted to smooth her hair, a gesture so uncharacteristically self-conscious that Ryan found himself smiling. "I was going to say determined. Come on, let's get you out of here before someone notices the missing patient." The hallway remained mercifully empty as they made their way to the service elevator. Ryan supported Victoria with a hand under her elbow, feeling her lean on him more heavily than she probably intended. In the elevator, she sagged against the wall, closing her eyes briefly. "You're really not okay," Ryan observed. "I'll be fine once we get those documents," she insisted, though the pallor of her skin suggested otherwise. The loading dock was bustling with activity. Delivery trucks, hospital staff moving supplies, maintenance workers taking smoke breaks. Ryan guided Victoria through the case, keeping to the edges where they were less likely to be noticed. His truck was parked in the main lot on the other side of the building. "Wait here," he instructed, leaving Victoria in the shadow of a dumpster enclosure. "I'll bring the truck around." 5 minutes later, they were driving away from Cedar Falls Memorial. Victoria slumped in the passenger's seat with her eyes closed. Ryan glanced at her with concern. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all. Victoria opened her eyes, fixing him with a steady gaze. "Mr. Mitchell, I've been making multi-million-dollar decisions with migraines that would drop most people to their knees. I can handle a little dizziness." "It's Ryan," he said, surprising himself. "If we're going to be breaking you out of hospitals and raiding bank vaults together, you might as well use my first name." A ghost of a smile touched Victoria's lips. "Ryan, then." She turned to look out the window as the hospital receded behind them. "First Cedar Bank. We have about 2 hours before they realize I'm gone and start looking." The bank manager, Marion Chen, was understandably shocked when Victoria Ashford appeared at the private entrance to First Cedar Bank, dressed in casual clothes and looking considerably less formidable than usual. "Victoria, what on earth is going on?" Marion asked, ushering them quickly into a private room adjacent to the main vault. "You look like you should be in a hospital." "I was," Victoria replied, sinking gratefully into one of the room's plush chairs. "It's complicated, but I need access to my father's safe deposit box, the largest one." Marion hesitated, her professional training clearly at war with her concern for Victoria's well-being. "I should call someone, your doctor, perhaps." "What you should do," Victoria said, her voice regaining some of its usual authority, "is bring me box 1482, as I've requested. This is a private banking matter, Marion, nothing more." The bank manager sighed in resignation. "I'll need to verify your identity. Standard procedure." After Marion left, Ryan turned to Victoria, who had closed her eyes again, her breathing shallow but controlled. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," she said automatically, then seemed to reconsider. "Actually, I feel like I've been hit by a truck, but it doesn't matter. We need those documents." Ryan studied her with growing concern. "Why is this so important to you? Yesterday you were ready to bulldoze the neighborhood without a second thought." Victoria opened her eyes, meeting his gaze directly. "Because I was wrong. Because my father knew something I didn't. Because Helen, your wife, somehow convinced him to do the right thing, and I owe it to his memory to understand why." Before Ryan could respond, Marion returned with another bank employee, both carrying a large metal box between them. They placed it on the conference table in the center of the room. "You'll have privacy," Marion assured them. "Take as much time as you need." She handed Victoria a key. "Call if you need anything else." After they left, Victoria inserted the key into the lock and lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of files neatly labeled in an elegant handwriting that Ryan assumed must have belonged to Edward Ashford. Victoria began sorting through them with the efficiency of someone accustomed to processing large amounts of information quickly. Here, she said after a few minutes, pulling out a thick file labeled Harrington Property Acquisition 2003. She opened it on the table, spreading out its contents. Environmental surveys, purchase agreements, correspondence. Ryan leaned over her shoulder scanning the documents. His eyes widened as he found what they were looking for. A comprehensive environmental assessment of the property, complete with soil sample results showing significant contamination in multiple areas. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a highlighted section. "Chromium levels 10 times the legal limit. Lead, arsenic, industrial solvents. This place was a toxic dump. And Harrington Chemical knew it." Victoria nodded grimly, flipping to another document. "And here's my father's plan. He knew the only way to force a proper cleanup was to sell the land for a sensitive use like a school that would trigger mandatory remediation under federal law." She shook her head, a complex mixture of emotions crossing her face. "All these years, I thought he had made a foolish business decision, selling valuable commercial property at a loss. But he was actually trying to correct an environmental crime. A crime that Harrington is now trying to cover up by reacquiring the land," Ryan added, the pieces clicking into place. "If Ashford Industries builds the shopping center, they can handle the contamination quietly without public scrutiny or proper remediation." Victoria turned to another file, this one labeled H.M. Mitchell Correspondence. Ryan's breath caught in his throat, and as she opened it, revealing several handwritten letters in Helen's familiar script. "Your wife wrote to my father after he was discharged," Victoria explained softly. "They stayed in touch. She was important to him during his recovery." Ryan picked up one of the letters with trembling hands, recognizing immediately the warmth and compassion that had made Helen such an exceptional nurse. "Dear Mr. Ashford, I hope this letter finds you well and continuing to improve. It was a privilege to care for you during your time at Memorial, and I've thought of our conversations often in the weeks since your discharge. You asked me to be honest with you about what truly matters in life, and I've been reflecting on your question. I believe what matters most is not what we accumulate, but what we contribute, not the empire we build, but how that empire serves those without power of their own. You have an opportunity that few are given, the chance to redefine your legacy in the final chapters of your life, to transform from a man of success to a man of significance. With respect and hope for your continued recovery, Helen Mitchell." "She never told me," Ryan said, his voice rough with emotion, "about your father, about these letters." "Patient confidentiality, perhaps," Victoria suggested. "Or maybe she didn't want to burden you with it during her illness." Ryan carefully returned the letter to its file, his mind reeling with this new connection between his late wife and the Ashford family. "So your father bought the contaminated property because of Helen's influence, because she helped him see things differently." Victoria's expression softened, vulnerability showing through her usual composed facade. "I believe so. In his journal, he wrote about wanting to make amends and leave a better legacy. He mentioned your wife often, calling her his conscience in scrubs." Ryan smiled despite himself, the description perfectly capturing Helen's gentle but persistent moral clarity. "That sounds like her." They spent the next hour going through the files, gathering evidence of both the contamination and Harrington's knowledge of it. The documents painted a damning picture. Harrington Chemical had knowingly allowed toxins to leach into the soil for years, then attempted to unload the property quickly when regulations tightened. Edward Ashford had purchased it specifically to prevent Harrington from selling to an unsuspecting commercial developer, instead forcing a proper environmental assessment through the school construction process. "This is more than enough to stop the Lincoln Heights project," Ryan said, organizing the most critical documents into a separate pile. "With these, we can prove that Harrington has been trying to cover up environmental crimes." Victoria nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "It's enough to stop the project, yes, but not enough to truly hold Harrington accountable. These documents are 20 years old. We need current testing to prove the contamination is still present and spreading. The testing you were conducting before Harrington took the reports from your office." "Exactly. Without current data, he can claim the problem was addressed during the school construction and no longer exists." Victoria tapped her fingers against the table, thinking. We need to get independent soil samples from the property today, if possible, before Harrington realizes what we're doing and finds a way to block access. Ryan checked his watch, nearly 4 o'clock p.m. The school will be empty soon, but how do we have the samples? Don't we need special equipment? Professionals? Victoria's expression shifted to one of grim determination. Yes, we do, and fortunately, I know exactly who to call. By 6 o'clock p.m., as dusk settled over Cedar Falls, Ryan found himself standing behind Lincoln Elementary School with Victoria and an environmental engineer named Alex Rodriguez, who had arrived with surprising speed after Victoria's phone call. Alex wore casual clothes rather than anything identifying his profession and carried what looked like ordinary gardening tools, though Ryan suspected they were specialized for soil collection. The most likely contamination would be in this area, Alex explained, consulting a map of the property Victoria had obtained from her files. Based on the original plant location and the groundwater flow patterns, they moved carefully through the wooded area behind the school, Alex taking samples at regular intervals and storing them in sealed containers. Victoria, still pale but moving with determined energy, documented each location with her phone, creating a record that would be difficult to dispute. Ryan kept watch, acutely aware that what they were doing might technically be trespassing, even though the property was a public school. More concerning was the possibility that Harrington might have people monitoring the site, especially after discovering Victoria's interest in the environmental reports. As they worked, Ryan found himself continually glancing at Victoria, still struggling to reconcile this version of her, committed, principled, willing to risk her health and possibly her career to expose the truth, with the cold corporate executive who had mocked Helen's watch and threatened his community. "You're staring, Mr. Mitchell," Victoria noted without looking up from where she was photographing Alex's sample collection. "Something on your mind?" Ryan hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm trying to understand how the person who stood in my basement and said that progress requires sacrifice is now breaking out of hospitals and conducting clandestine soil sampling to save the very community she was planning to demolish." Victoria's hands stilled, her gaze remaining fixed on the ground. "People can change, Mr. Mitchell. Sometimes they just need a reason." "And what was your reason?" She looked up then, meeting his eyes with an intensity that caught him off guard. "You, or rather, what you represent. Integrity, courage, the willingness to fight for something bigger than yourself, even when it seems hopeless." She glanced away as if embarrassed by her own admission. "It's not a quality I encounter often in my usual circles." Before Ryan could respond to this unexpected revelation, Alex straightened from his work, holding up a sample container. "This doesn't look good. The soil here has obvious discoloration and an odor consistent with petroleum-based contamination. I'll need to run proper tests, but based on my experience, I'd say we're looking at significant toxic presence, and we're less than 200 yards from the school playground." Victoria's expression hardened. "How quickly can you complete the analysis?" "For preliminary results, 24 hours if I put a rush on it. Comprehensive findings would take longer." "Do the rush analysis," Victoria instructed. "I'll triple your usual rate. We need those results immediately." As Alex packed up his equipment, Ryan noticed Victoria swaying slightly, her face even paler than before. Without thinking, he moved closer, placing a steadying hand on her arm. "You need to rest. You shouldn't even be out of the hospital." She started to object, then seemed to reconsider as another wave of dizziness visibly passed through her. "Perhaps you're right, but I can't go back to the hospital. Harrington would find me there, and I can't go to my apartment either. It's the first place he'd look." Ryan made a quick decision. "You'll come to my place. It's the last location anyone would expect you to be." Victoria raised an eyebrow, a hint of her usual sardonic humor returning. "Are you inviting me for a sleepover, Mr. Mitchell?" "I'm offering you a safe place to rest while we figure out our next move," Ryan corrected, though he couldn't help but return her small smile. "And given that we're conducting secret environmental testing together, maybe you could start calling me Ryan." Her smile widened slightly. "Ryan, then. And yes, I accept your offer of sanctuary, though I should warn you that I'm an exceedingly demanding house guest." Somehow that doesn't surprise me. They waited while Alex departed with the samples, promising to call as soon as he had preliminary results. Then Ryan helped Victoria to his truck, noticing how she leaned on him more heavily than before, her body finally acknowledging the stress and exhaustion it had been fighting all day. As they drove through the darkening streets of Cedar Falls, Ryan called Diane to check on Grace, relieved to hear that his daughter was happily playing with Sarah and showing no signs of concern about her unusual sleepover arrangement. He kept his explanation deliberately vague, promising again to fill Diane in on the details soon. "Your daughter is with friends tonight?" Victoria asked after he ended the call. "Yes, I thought it was safer, given what's happening." Victoria nodded, her expression solemn. "You're a good father, Ryan. Grace is fortunate." The simple compliment, delivered without her usual sharp edge, touched Ryan unexpectedly. "I try to be. It's not always easy, especially since Helen died. But you keep trying, that's what matters." Victoria turned to look out the window, her voice softening. "My father wasn't always present when I was growing up. Business took priority. It wasn't until his heart attack, until he met your wife, that he seemed to understand what he'd missed." The revelation of this vulnerability, this glimpse into Victoria's personal history, created a sudden intimacy in the truck's small cabin. Ryan found himself wanting to know more about the woman behind the corporate mask, about the path that had led her to become the person he'd first met in the basement, and then the very different woman sitting beside him now. His apartment building looked shabbier than usual as they pulled up, the peeling paint and sagging gutters stark in the harsh glow of the security lights. Ryan felt a flash of self-consciousness as he helped Victoria from the truck, acutely aware of the contrast between his modest home and the luxuries she was accustomed to. "It's not much," he said as they climbed the stairs to a second-floor unit, "but it's clean and safe." Victoria didn't respond immediately, her attention seemingly focused on managing the stairs without revealing how weak she still felt. When they reached his door, however, she paused, looking at him directly. "Thank you," she said simply, "for helping me today, for trusting me despite every reason not to." The sincerity in her voice, the absence of her usual armor, made Ryan acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the faint scent of her perfume still detectable beneath the antiseptic hospital smell, of the way the hallway light caught the gold in her hair. For a moment, he forgot about Lincoln Heights, about Harrington, about all the complications that had brought them to this point. There was just this woman, this unexpected connection. The moment stretched, charged with possibility, until Mrs. Abernathy's door opened across the hall, breaking the spell. "Mitchell, I thought I heard you out here." The elderly woman peered at them curiously, her gaze lingering on Victoria with undisguised interest. "Grace isn't with you. She didn't come home from school. She's staying with her friend Sarah tonight," Ryan explained quickly. "This is a colleague, Victoria. We're working on a project together." Mrs. Abernathy's eyebrows rose, her expression making it clear she had her own ideas about what kind of project might require a woman to visit Ryan's apartment in the evening. "Well, isn't that nice? You two have a good night then." She retreated back into her apartment with a knowing smile that made Ryan want to sink through the floor. Victoria's lips twitched with barely suppressed amusement as Ryan unlocked his door. "A colleague? Is that what I am now?" "It seems simpler than explaining that you're the CEO trying to demolish our neighborhood who's now helping me expose an environmental cover-up after escaping from the hospital." Victoria laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that transformed her face, revealing the woman who might have existed if life had taken different turns. "Yes, I suppose that would have required more explanation than your neighbor was prepared for." Inside the apartment, Ryan was grateful that he'd tidied up that morning, though the modest furnishings and worn carpet couldn't be disguised. Victoria didn't comment on her surroundings, however, moving instead to the kitchen table where Grace's homework still lay spread out alongside Ryan's notes about the Lincoln Heights project. "Your daughter is artistic," Victoria observed, gently touching a drawing Grace had made of their apartment building, with all the neighbors standing outside holding hands in a circle. "She sees connections between people." "Like her mother," Ryan said, the comparison coming naturally. "Helen could always see the best in people, the potential for connection, even in unlikely places." Victoria nodded, her fingers tracing the childish figures in the drawing. "That explains a lot about you, too." Before Ryan could ask what she meant, Victoria swayed again, catching herself against the table's edge. Her face had gone alarmingly pale, the earlier exertion clearly taking its toll. "You need to rest," Ryan said firmly, moving to her side. "You can take my bedroom. I'll sleep on the couch." Victoria started to protest, then seemed to recognize the futility of it as another wave of dizziness hit her. "Just for a few hours," she conceded. "We still have work to do once Alex calls with the preliminary results." Ryan led her to his bedroom, acutely aware of the strangeness of having Victoria Ashford in his personal space. The room was simple: a queen bed with a plain blue comforter, a dresser with framed photos of Grace and Helen, a small bookshelf filled with electrical manuals and a few novels Helen had loved. Victoria paused at the photographs, studying one of Helen holding a newborn Grace, her expression soft with wonder. "She was beautiful," Victoria said quietly. "I can see why my father was so taken with her spirit." "She was the best person I've ever known," Ryan replied, the words coming easily despite the familiar ache of loss. "Kind without being weak, strong without being hard." Victoria turned to him, something vulnerable and questioning in her eyes. "The opposite of me, then." Ryan shook his head. "I used to think so. Now I'm not so sure." Their eyes held for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities, with connections neither had anticipated. Then Victoria looked away, a hint of her old self-protective reserve returning. "I should rest," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "And you should check on your daughter. Make sure she's okay with her friend." Ryan nodded, accepting the withdrawal while recognizing it for what it was. Not rejection, but caution. A pause rather than an ending. "There are clean towels in the bathroom if you want to shower, and I can find you something to wear besides that scrub top." He left her to settle in, returning to the kitchen to call Diane again and check on Grace. His daughter was fine, already in pajamas and excited about watching a movie with Sarah before bed. After ensuring that Diane still had no concerns about the unexpected sleepover arrangement, Ryan hung up and leaned against the counter, trying to process the day's extraordinary events. Just a week ago, Victoria Ashford had been his adversary, a corporate predator threatening his daughter's school and his community. Now she was sleeping in his bed, having risked her health and possibly her career to expose an environmental cover-up that her own company was involved in. The transformation seemed impossible. Yet here they were. Ryan made himself a sandwich, realizing he hadn't eaten since morning, and prepared a second one for Victoria in case she was hungry when she woke. He was setting them on plates when his phone rang, an unknown number. "Hello? Ryan, it's Emma Chen from the Gazette." The reporter's voice was tense, urgent. "I need to talk to you immediately about Victoria Ashford and the Lincoln Heights project." Ryan hesitated, wary of sharing information that might jeopardize their investigation into the contamination. "I'm not sure I have anything new to tell you, Emma." "But I have something to tell you," she insisted. "Something you need to know before you get in any deeper with Victoria Ashford." The ominous tone set off warning bells in Ryan's mind. "What are you talking about?" "Not over the phone. Can you meet me tonight? It's important." Ryan glanced toward the bedroom where Victoria was resting. "I can't leave right now." "Can you tell me what this is about?" Emma sighed, clearly frustrated. "It's about Victoria Ashford's real reasons for getting close to you. She's not who you think she is, Ryan. She's playing you." A cold feeling settled in Ryan's stomach. "What do you mean?" "Victoria Ashford has known about the contamination at Lincoln Heights from the beginning. She's not trying to expose it. She's trying to control the narrative, to limit Ashford Industries' liability by managing how and when the information comes out." Ryan's mind raced, trying to reconcile this accusation with the Victoria he'd spent the day with. The woman who'd broken out of the hospital, who'd risked her health to gather evidence, who'd looked at Helen's photo with genuine respect. "How do you know this?" he asked, keeping his voice low to ensure Victoria couldn't overhear from the bedroom. "I have a source inside Ashford Industries, someone who's seen the internal communications between Victoria and the board. She's been playing both sides, Ryan, using you to gain credibility with the community while simultaneously working with Harrington to minimize the company's exposure." The accusation hit Ryan like a physical blow. Could it be true? Had he been manipulated all along? The Victoria he'd encountered today seemed genuine in her desire to expose the truth, but he'd also witnessed her remarkable ability to adapt and persuade. "I need to see proof," he said finally. Documents, emails, something concrete. I have them, Emma assured him, but I can't send them electronically. Too risky. Meet me at Riverside Park in an hour. Same spot as before. I'll bring everything. After Emma hung up, Ryan stood motionless in the kitchen, his mind swirling with doubt and confusion. The timing of the call seemed suspicious, coming just as he and Victoria were making progress with the environmental testing. But Emma had been the one to first alert him to the possibility of contamination. Why would she try to undermine their investigation now? Unless Victoria had somehow gotten to her, or unless Harrington had. The shower was running, Victoria apparently taking him up on the offer to clean up. He had at least 15 minutes before she'd emerge, possibly longer if she decided to rest afterward. Time enough to meet Emma and see the supposed evidence for himself. Decision made, Ryan quickly wrote a note explaining that he'd gone to pick up dinner and would be back soon. He left it on the kitchen table where Victoria would see it, then grabbed his keys and headed for the door, pausing only to collect a small recorder from his toolbox, a device he sometimes used to document electrical issues for clients. If Emma really did have damning evidence against Victoria, he wanted to capture the conversation. The October night had turned cold, a sharp wind cutting through Ryan's jacket as he drove to Riverside Park. The conversation with Emma played on repeat in his mind, raising questions that had no easy answers. Had Victoria been manipulating him all along? Was her apparent transformation from corporate shark to environmental crusader just an elaborate act? Or was Emma's source feeding her false information, perhaps at Harrington's direction? The park was nearly deserted when Ryan arrived. Just a few cars in the lot belonging to the last joggers of the evening. He made his way to the boat launch area, the same spot where he'd met Emma before. The wooden dock extended into the dark water, illuminated only by a single lamppost that cast long shadows across the planks. Emma was already there, a manila envelope clutched in her hands. She turned as Ryan approached, relief evident in her expression. "You came. I wasn't sure you would. You said you had proof that Victoria Ashford is playing me. I need to see it." Emma nodded, opening the envelope. These are internal Ashford Industries memos from the past week. They show that Victoria has been fully aware of the contamination issue from the beginning of the Lincoln Heights project, not just since finding her father's files. She handed Ryan several printed pages which he struggled to read in the dim light. They appeared to be emails between Victoria and Thomas Harrington discussing containment strategies for the legacy issue at the Lincoln site. In one particularly damning exchange, Victoria supposedly wrote, "Mitchell is proving useful as a community liaison. His connection to my father's nurse gives us a perfect cover story for my sudden interest in environmental concerns." Ryan felt sick as he read the words, the betrayal cutting deeper than he would have expected. "How did you get these?" "My source is someone high up in Ashford Industries, someone who believes the public deserves to know the truth." Emma took the papers back, returning them to the envelope. "Victoria Ashford isn't your ally, Ryan. She's using you to manage a potential PR disaster for her company." Ryan shook his head, still struggling to reconcile these documents with the Victoria who had stared at Helen's photo with genuine emotion, who had collapsed from exhaustion while trying to gather evidence, who had shared her father's letters and revealed her own vulnerabilities. "Why tell me this now? Why not when we first met?" Emma hesitated, something flickering across her face that Ryan couldn't quite identify. "I didn't have confirmation until today. My source took a significant risk getting these documents to me." Something about her explanation felt off, though Ryan couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Perhaps it was the convenient timing, or the way Emma kept referencing her anonymous source without offering any details that could verify their existence. "I need to take those documents," Ryan said, reaching for the envelope, "to study them more carefully." Emma pulled back, clutching the envelope tighter. "I can't let them out of my possession. My source was explicit about that, but I can give you copies tomorrow." Ryan's suspicions deepened. A legitimate journalist would want their evidence examined, verified. Emma's reluctance suggested something else might be happening here. "At least let me take a photo of them with my phone," he suggested, already reaching for his pocket, "so I can study them more carefully." "No." Emma's response was too quick, too vehement. "No photos. My source was clear that digital copies could be traced." Ryan took a step back, his instincts now screaming that something was very wrong with this situation. You know, it's funny. You keep talking about this source, but you've never once mentioned their name or position. And these emails you're showing me, they're awfully convenient, almost like they were created specifically to drive a wedge between me and Victoria. Emma's expression hardened. You don't believe me. You think I'm making this up. I think someone might be using you, Emma. Ryan paused, a new possibility occurring to him. Or you might not be Emma Chen at all. The woman's posture changed, subtle but unmistakable, a shift from earnest journalist to something more calculating, more dangerous. You're smarter than Harrington gave you credit for, she said, her voice dropping its previous urgency, but not smart enough to stay away from Victoria Ashford. Ryan's blood ran cold as the truth clicked into place. You're working for Harrington. The woman who had called herself Emma Chen smiled, all pretense of journalistic integrity gone. Thomas Harrington protects his interests, Mr. Mitchell. The real Emma Chen is currently out of town at a journalism conference in Chicago, something you could have verified with a simple phone call to the Gazette. But you were too eager to believe that Victoria Ashford might be deceiving you. Ryan backed away, acutely aware that they were alone in a dark, isolated area of the park. So the documents are fake. Victoria really is trying to expose the contamination. The contamination is real enough, not Emma confirmed. But so is Victoria's vulnerability. Harrington has been gathering evidence of her father's involvement in a number of questionable business practices over the years. If she pushes too hard on Lincoln Heights, that information goes public and destroys Edward Ashford's legacy. She knows this, which is why she's been so careful, so strategic in her approach. You're trying to turn me against her, Ryan realized. To isolate her. Why? The woman shrugged, dropping all pretense now. Divide and conquer. Basic strategy. Victoria Ashford alone is manageable. She has too much to lose by taking Harrington on directly. But Victoria Ashford with community support, with your particular brand of moral crusading behind her, that's more problematic. Ryan had heard enough. He turned to leave, his only thought now to get back to his apartment, to warn Victoria about Harrington's scheme. I wouldn't rush home if I were you, the woman called after him, her voice carrying a threat that stopped Ryan in his tracks. Who knows what might have happened while you've been gone? Harrington's people are quite efficient. Ryan burst through his apartment door, heart hammering against his ribs. The living room was empty, the note he'd left still sitting on the kitchen table. But Victoria was gone. Victoria, he called, moving quickly to the bedroom. The bathroom door stood open, steam still lingering from the shower, but she was nowhere to be found. On the bed lay his note about getting dinner, now with an addition in elegant handwriting. Ryan, Harrington called. He has Grace, meeting him at Ashford Industries. Don't follow. We'll handle this. V. The world seemed to tilt beneath Ryan's feet, a roaring in his ears, drowning out all other sounds. Grace. Harrington had Grace. But how? She was supposed to be safe with Diane. With shaking hands, Ryan called Diane's number. No answer. He tried again with the same result, panic building with each unanswered ring. Finally desperate, he called Sarah's cell phone, a number Grace had memorized for emergencies, which Ryan had therefore also memorized. The young girl answered on the second ring, her voice small and confused. Hello? Sarah, it's Mr. Mitchell, Grace's dad. Is Grace there with you? Can I talk to her? Grace went home, Sarah said, sounding puzzled. Her mom came to get her about an hour ago. She said there was a family emergency. Ryan's blood turned to ice. Her mom? The lady said she was Grace's mom's sister. She had a picture of Grace's mom and everything. She said you sent her to bring Grace home. Ryan fought to keep his voice calm, not wanting to frighten the child. Is your mom there, Sarah? Can I talk to her? She's giving Tim his bath. Do you want me to get her? Yes, please, right away. While he waited, Ryan's mind raced. Someone claiming to be Helen's sister, a sister who didn't exist, had taken Grace from Diane's house, which meant Harrington had been planning this move before Ryan ever left the apartment to meet Emma. When the whole thing had been a setup to get him away from Victoria and to isolate Grace. Diane came on the line, her voice immediately anxious. Ryan, what's wrong? Sarah said you were asking about Grace. Did someone come and take Grace from your house? Ryan demanded, too frantic for niceties. Yes, about an hour ago, a woman who said she was Helen's sister. She had ID and everything, Ryan. She said you'd had a family emergency and sent her to bring Grace home. Grace seemed to recognize her from a photo she showed. Helen doesn't have a sister, Ryan cut in, his voice tight with fear. That woman wasn't family. Diane's sharp intake of breath told him she understood the gravity of the situation. Oh my God, Ryan, I'm so sorry. I never would have let her go if I'd had any doubt. She seemed so legitimate, and Grace wasn't afraid. It's not your fault, Ryan assured her, already moving toward the door. Call the police. Tell them Grace Mitchell has been taken by someone falsely claiming to be family. I'm going to find her. He ended the call and dialed Victoria's number, praying she would answer despite her note instructing him not to follow. The call went straight to voicemail, increasing his fear that she might be walking into the same trap that had ensnared Grace. Ryan grabbed his keys, his mind clearing as adrenaline and parental instinct overrode panic. Harrington had taken Grace to lure Victoria to Ashford Industries. Victoria had gone, believing she could handle the situation, but neither of them understood what Ryan now knew, that Harrington was willing to go to extraordinary lengths, including kidnapping a child, to protect his family's dark secrets. As he ran for his truck, Ryan's hand brushed against Helen's watch on his wrist. The familiar weight of it, the connection to her steady moral compass, helped center him. Helen would know what to do. Helen would be brave and smart and focused on saving their daughter. Ryan could do no less. The Ashford Industries building loomed against the night sky, most of its windows dark except for the top floor where lights still blazed from what Ryan assumed must be the executive offices. He parked his truck directly in front of the main entrance, not caring about the no parking signs or the possibility of being towed. Nothing mattered now except getting to Grace. The lobby doors were locked, but the security desk was still staffed by a single guard who looked up in surprise as Ryan pounded on the glass. After a moment's hesitation, the guard approached the door, opening it just enough to speak. Building's closed to the public, sir. You'll need to come back tomorrow. I need to get to the executive floor, Ryan said, fighting to keep his voice steady. It's an emergency. My daughter is up there. The guard's expression shifted from professional detachment to confusion. Your daughter? In the executive offices at this hour? Thomas Harrington has her, Ryan explained, aware of how improbable it sounded. And Victoria Ashford, please, I just need to get upstairs. Sir, Mr. Harrington left hours ago, and Miss Ashford hasn't been in the office today. She's out sick. There's no one on the executive floor except the cleaning staff. Ryan's mind raced. If Harrington wasn't here, where had he taken Grace and Victoria? The lights are on up there, he pointed out, gesturing toward the illuminated top floor. That's the automated system, the guard explained. Certain offices stay lit for security purposes, but I can assure you no one's up there. I'd see them on the security monitors. Ryan felt a cold certainty that the guard was lying, or had been instructed to lie if Ryan appeared. Then you won't mind if I check for myself. Before the guard could respond, Ryan pushed past him into the lobby, heading for the elevators. The guard called after him, threatening to call the police, but Ryan ignored him. Let them call. He needed to find Grace. The executive elevator required a key card, but the service elevator at the back of the lobby did not. Ryan ducked into it just as the guard reached for his radio, presumably to call for backup. As the doors closed, Ryan punched the button for the top floor, his heart pounding in his chest. The elevator rose smoothly, each floor bringing him closer to whatever confrontation awaited. Ryan had no plan beyond finding Grace and ensuring her safety. Victoria, with her resources and connections, would have to fend for herself. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, Ryan found himself in a dimly lit service corridor, the air heavy with the smell of cleaning products. He moved cautiously toward where he assumed the main offices would be, guided by the glow of light coming from beneath a door at the end of the hall. As he drew closer, he could hear voices, Harrington's smooth, cultured tones and Victoria's sharper, more urgent responses. But no child's voice, no sign of Grace. Ryan pressed himself against the wall beside the door, straining to hear the conversation within. You've made quite a mess of things, Victoria, Harrington was saying, his voice casual, as if discussing a minor scheduling issue rather than kidnapping. Your father would be disappointed. He understood how the game is played. My father understood responsibility, Victoria replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. Something you've spent your entire career avoiding. Now, where is the girl? You said she would be here. All in good time. First, I need your assurance that this environmental crusade of yours is finished. The Lincoln Heights project proceeds as originally planned. The contamination is handled quietly during construction. No public statements, no independent testing, no dramatic revelations. And if I refuse? Harrington's laugh held no humor. Then Mr. Mitchell's daughter becomes a tragic statistic. A child who wandered too close to a construction site, perhaps, or a victim of a random abduction. Cedar Falls has its share of unsavory elements, after all. The casual cruelty, the willingness to threaten a child's life to protect corporate interests made Ryan's blood boil. But he forced himself to remain still, to listen. Rushing in without understanding the full situation would only endanger Grace further. "You're bluffing," Victoria said, though her voice held a note of uncertainty. "You wouldn't harm a child. Even you have limits, Thomas." "Do I?" The contamination at Lincoln Heights has already harmed dozens of children over the years. Elevated cancer rates, developmental issues, all traceable to the toxins my family's company left in the soil. What's one more casualty in the grand scheme of things? Ryan heard Victoria's sharp intake of breath. "You knew? All this time you knew children were being affected?" "Of course I knew, just as your father knew when he forced the sale to the school district. His grand moral gesture, using innocent children as canaries in the coal mine to force a cleanup that should have been my financial responsibility. Very clever of Edward. Very cruel too, though I doubt he saw it that way." Ryan had heard enough. If Harrington was willing to acknowledge harming children through contamination, he was certainly capable of harming Grace directly. And if Grace wasn't in that room with Victoria and Harrington, where was she? He scanned the corridor, noticing a door marked Executive Lounge a few yards away. Moving silently, Ryan approached it, turning the handle slowly. It was unlocked. Inside, the lounge was dark except for the city lights filtering through large windows. As Ryan's eyes adjusted, he could make out plush furniture, a bar area, and a small kitchenette. And there, curled up on a sofa, her small form barely visible in the dim light, was Grace. Ryan rushed to her side, his heart in his throat. She appeared to be sleeping, her breathing deep and regular. When he touched her shoulder gently, she stirred but didn't fully wake. "Grace," he whispered, checking her for any signs of injury. "Gracie, wake up. It's Daddy." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Daddy, I'm so tired." "I know, sweetheart, but we need to go now." Ryan gathered her into his arms, relief washing through him as she nestled against his chest. She seemed unharmed, just unnaturally drowsy. Had they given her something to make her sleep? As he turned to leave, the lounge door opened wider, light from the corridor spilling in. Harrington stood there, his aristocratic features set in an expression of mild annoyance, as if dealing with an unexpected delivery rather than a father rescuing his kidnapped daughter. "Mr. Mitchell, how predictable. Victoria assured me you wouldn't follow her, but I knew better." Harrington stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The masculine hero complex is so tediously reliable. Ryan tightened his hold on Grace, backing toward the windows. "Stay away from us." "Or what?" Harrington seemed genuinely curious. "You'll call the police? Report that your daughter was kidnapped by a respected business leader? With no evidence beyond your word against mine? I don't think so." "Where's Victoria?" "Considering my offer. She's quite pragmatic when properly motivated, unlike you with your tiresome moral absolutism." Ryan continued moving backward, trying to put distance between Grace and this man who spoke of harming children with such casual indifference. "The contamination is real. You've been poisoning people for decades. Children, families. And now you're trying to cover it up by building a shopping mall." Harrington shrugged, the gesture elegant and dismissive. "Business is about managing liabilities, Mr. Mitchell. The contamination is a liability. The Lincoln Heights project transforms it into an asset. It's really quite elegant from a financial perspective." "It's criminal," Ryan countered, his back now against the cool glass of the windows. "And people will find out. Victoria has her father's files. We have soil samples being tested right now. You can't silence everyone." Something shifted in Harrington's expression, a flicker of genuine concern breaking through his composed facade. Soil samples? When? Where? The reaction confirmed what Ryan had suspected. Harrington didn't know about their clandestine testing that afternoon. He'd been focused on separating Ryan from Victoria, on isolating Grace as leverage. But he hadn't anticipated how much progress they had already made in gathering evidence. Before Harrington could recover from this revelation, the lounge door burst open again. Victoria stood there, her face pale but determined, a security guard's key card in her hand. "It's over, Thomas," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion evident in her posture. "I've just emailed the board of directors, the EPA, and the Cedar Falls Gazette copies of all the documentation. My father's original environmental assessment, the recent soil tests, your emails about covering up the contamination. Everything." Harrington's composure cracked entirely, his face contorting with rage. "You stupid girl. Do you have any idea what you've done? The liability you've created, the shareholder value you've destroyed? I've done what my father should have done 8 years ago," Victoria replied, moving into the room to stand beside Ryan and Grace. "Expose the truth, choose people over profits, the right path instead of the easy one." Harrington lunged forward suddenly, his control abandoning him completely. "You've ruined everything, your father's company, your inheritance, my reputation, all destroyed because you couldn't stay in your lane." Victoria didn't flinch, meeting his fury with a calm certainty that Ryan couldn't help but admire. "No, Thomas, you destroyed those things yourself the moment you decided that money mattered more than people's lives, more than children's health and safety." As if on cue, the sound of sirens became audible outside the building, blue and red lights reflecting off the glass behind them. Harrington froze, his face draining of color as he realized the extent of his defeat. "That would be the police," Victoria explained, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "I called them before coming up here, told them everything, the kidnapping, the contamination, your threats. They were quite interested, particularly in the part about endangering children." Harrington seemed to age before their eyes, his shoulders slumping as the full weight of his actions and their consequences settled upon him. Inayhasham. Without another word, he sank into one of the lounge chairs, all fight gone out of him. Ryan held Grace closer, her drowsy weight in his arms the only reality that mattered in that moment. He looked at Victoria, standing tall despite her hospital escape just hours earlier, her face illuminated by the pulsing police lights from below. "Thank you," he said simply, knowing the words were inadequate for what she had done, for the risks she had taken, the transformation she had undergone. Victoria's expression softened as she looked at Grace, her hand reaching out to gently brush a strand of hair from the child's face. "Some things are worth fighting for," she said quietly, "even when it costs you everything." In that moment, with Grace safe in his arms and Victoria standing beside them, Ryan felt something shift between them. The final barriers falling away, replaced by a connection forged in crisis and cemented in shared purpose. Whatever came next, the police statements, the environmental investigations, the inevitable corporate and legal battles, they would face it together. The sound of heavy footsteps in the corridor announced the arrival of the police. As Victoria moved to open the door for them, she paused, turning back to Ryan with a small, genuine smile. "By the way," she said, her voice lighter than he'd ever heard it before, "I think it's time you started calling me Vicky." Days passed in a blur of police statements, medical examinations, and media coverage. Grace was found to have been given a mild sedative, enough to make her drowsy, but not enough to cause harm. The doctors assured Ryan she would suffer no lasting effects. Harrington was arrested on multiple charges: kidnapping, environmental violations, corporate fraud. He was released on bail but barred from approaching any Ashford Industries properties or contacting Victoria, Ryan, or Grace. The company's stock plummeted as the contamination story broke, triggering shareholder lawsuits and regulatory investigations. Through it all, Victoria remained a constant presence in Ryan and Grace's lives. Despite the corporate chaos swirling around her, she made time each day to check on Grace, to bring her small gifts: art supplies, books, once even a small telescope that had the child wide-eyed with wonder. A week after the confrontation at Ashford Industries, Ryan found himself sitting on a bench in Cedar Falls Park, watching as Victoria pushed Grace on the swings. His daughter's laughter carried across the playground, bright and carefree, as if the trauma of her kidnapping had already faded from her young mind. "Higher, Vicky, higher," Grace called, and Victoria obliged, pushing the swing with greater force, her own laughter joining Grace's. The sight stirred something in Ryan's chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a sense of possibility he'd thought died with Helen. It was too soon to name it, too fragile to examine closely, but it was there nonetheless. A future different from the one he'd imagined, but perhaps no less beautiful for being unexpected. Ryan's phone buzzed with a text from Alex Rodriguez, the environmental engineer. Final test results confirm contamination present at dangerous levels. Full report coming tomorrow. This is big, Ryan. He showed the message to Victoria when she and Grace returned to the bench, pink-cheeked and breathless from their play. "That's the final nail in Harrington's coffin," Victoria said, her expression solemn despite her casual words. "And probably in Ashford Industries as well. The company won't survive this. Not in its current form." "I'm sorry," Ryan said, realizing that despite everything, this was still the company her father had built, still her inheritance and legacy. Victoria shook her head, a surprising peace in her eyes. "Don't be. Some things need to end so better things can begin. My father would understand that now, I think." Grace tugged at Victoria's sleeve, oblivious to the gravity of their conversation. "Can we get ice cream, please?" Victoria smiled, the transformation from corporate CEO to something warmer, more human, now complete in Ryan's eyes. "Ice cream sounds perfect. What do you think, Ryan?" "I think," Ryan began, then paused, struck by how natural this felt, the three of them together making simple plans, sharing a beautiful autumn day. "I think ice cream is exactly what we need." As they walked toward the park's small concession stand, Grace skipping ahead, Victoria's hand brushed against Ryan's, a brief electric contact that might have been accidental but felt deliberate. He looked at her, and the question in his eyes was answered by the gentle certainty in hers. Later, after they'd returned to Ryan's apartment and Grace had gone to bed, exhausted from her day at the park, Ryan and Victoria sat at the kitchen table, a pot of tea between them. The domesticity of the scene struck Ryan as surreal given where they'd started, adversaries on opposite sides of a community battle. "The board is meeting tomorrow," Victoria said, wrapping her hands around her mug. "They'll almost certainly ask for my resignation." "Will you fight it?" She shook her head. "No, it's time for a change, for the company and for me." "What will you do?" Ryan asked, trying to imagine Victoria Ashford without the corporate identity that had defined her for so long. "I've been thinking about that," she replied, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "My father left me more than just the company. There's a substantial personal fortune separate from Ashford Industries. I've never touched it, never needed to. But now," she paused, considering her words carefully, "I'm thinking about creating a foundation, the Edward Ashford Environmental Justice Foundation, to help communities like Lincoln Heights fight corporate polluters, to fund cleanup efforts, to support the medical needs of people affected by contamination." Ryan stared at her, amazed by the transformation that had occurred in such a short time. That's incredible, Victoria." "Vicky," she corrected gently, "I told you it's time for a change. Victoria Ashford was my corporate persona. I think I'd like to be Vicky now, at least with people who matter." The implication hung in the air between them, a question neither was quite ready to voice aloud. Ryan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. The contact was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they'd experienced together, everything they might yet become to each other. "I like Vicky," he said softly. She smiled, turning her hand to intertwine her fingers with his. "There's something else I've been thinking about. The Lincoln Elementary property. It can't remain a school, not with the contamination levels we found. But I've been consulting with environmental engineers about remediation options. It would be expensive, but with the right approach, the land could be made safe." "And then what?" Vicky's eyes lit up with the kind of passion Ryan had previously only seen when she talked about corporate acquisitions. "We build a new school, a better one, with state-of-the-art facilities, environmental monitoring systems, scholarship programs for families affected by the contamination. We make it a model for how corporations can make amends for past wrongs. We, Ryan repeated, catching the pronoun. Vicky hesitated, vulnerability flashing across her face. I was hoping you might want to be involved. With your connection to the community, your understanding of what the families need, we could make something truly special together. The offer hung in the air, layered with meanings beyond the professional collaboration she was proposing. Ryan thought about Helen, about what she would think of this unexpected turn his life had taken. He could almost hear her voice. Love doesn't follow predictable paths, Ryan. Sometimes it finds you in the most unlikely places. I'd like that, he said finally, to build something together. 6 months later, the spring sun warmed the grounds of the new Lincoln Community School, casting dappled light through the young maple trees that lined the recently completed playground. Children's laughter echoed across the modern campus, a sound that never failed to bring a smile to Ryan Mitchell's face as he stood on the steps of the main building, watching the afternoon recess in full swing. So much had changed in the months since Thomas Harrington's arrest had blown open decades of corporate malfeasance and environmental crimes. The original Lincoln Elementary site had been declared a Superfund cleanup location, the extensive remediation process now underway under strict EPA supervision. The school itself had been relocated to a new site 2 miles away, on clean land donated by the Edward Ashford Environmental Justice Foundation. The new school was everything the old one hadn't been: spacious, modern, equipped with state-of-the-art facilities and staffed by the best educators in the region. Its environmental health monitoring systems were pioneering, setting new standards for school safety across the country. More than that, it had become a community center, offering adult education classes, health screenings for families affected by the contamination, and legal resources for those still navigating the complex compensation process. Ryan glanced at Helen's watch on his wrist. The leather band had been replaced with a new one, a birthday gift from Vicky, but the watch face remained the same, still keeping perfect time. Some things changed, others endured. The key was knowing which was which. Dad, look what I made!" Grace came running across the playground, her blonde hair streaming behind her, a colorful ceramic tile clutched carefully in her hands. At 8 years old, she'd grown taller, her face losing some of its baby roundness, but her eyes remained the same bright blue and full of wonder. So much like Helen's that it sometimes still stole Ryan's breath. Ryan knelt to examine her creation, a mosaic piece depicting 3 figures standing before a building that was clearly meant to be the new school. "This is beautiful, Gracie," he said, recognizing the figures as himself, Grace, and Vicky. "Is it for the community wall?" Grace nodded enthusiastically. "Ms. Carter says everyone's tile will be part of the big mural in the entrance, so the school will always remember all the people who helped build it." Ryan smiled, touched by the symbolism. The community wall had been Vicky's idea, a mosaic installation where every child and family affected by the Lincoln Heights contamination could contribute a piece, creating something beautiful from the fragments of what had been broken. "She's going to love it," Ryan said, referring to Vicky, who was currently in Washington, D.C., testifying before a congressional committee about corporate environmental accountability. Her transformation from cutthroat CEO to environmental justice warrior had made national headlines, particularly after she'd liquidated most of her personal fortune to fund cleanup efforts and medical support for affected families. "When is she coming home?" Grace asked, the question devoid of any anxiety or insecurity. In her mind, home now naturally included Vicky, a fact that still amazed Ryan given how their journey had begun. "Tomorrow evening," Ryan replied, standing as the bell rang to signal the end of recess. Just in time for the dedication ceremony, Grace handed him the tile for safekeeping and raced back to join her classmates, waving at Ryan as her class filed back into the building. He watched her go, his heart full with a mixture of pride and gratitude for her resilience, for the community that had come together in crisis, for the unexpected second chance at happiness that had emerged from the wreckage of Ashford Industries. As he turned to go back inside, Ryan spotted Frank Thompson approaching. The retired science teacher had become a key figure in the new school's environmental education program, his decades of knowledge now shared with a new generation of students. "Quite a place we've built," Frank observed, looking around with satisfaction. Who'd have thought 6 months ago we'd be standing here? Not me, Ryan admitted. I was just trying to save the old school. I never imagined we'd end up creating something better. That's what happens when you fight for what's right instead of what's easy, Frank said, echoing Helen's philosophy. Speaking of which, our mutual friend made quite an impression in Washington from what I hear. The senator called her testimony compelling and irrefutable. That sounds like Vicky, Ryan said with a smile. She's just as persuasive fighting for environmental justice as she was closing corporate deals. Frank nodded sagely. Some people just need the right cause and the right person to show them what's worth fighting for. As Frank continued into the building, Ryan remained on the steps a moment longer, taking in the scene before him. Children playing, teachers engaged, parents volunteering. A community not just preserved but strengthened through adversity. And at the center of it all, a connection he never could have predicted, a future he never could have imagined. His phone buzzed with a text from Vicky. Testimony complete. Committee seemed receptive. Senator Williams has agreed to sponsor the Corporate Environmental Accountability Act. Coming home tomorrow as planned. Miss you both. Ryan smiled, still not entirely used to the warmth that flooded him whenever he heard from her. Their relationship had evolved slowly, deliberately. Both of them aware of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together and the complexities of building something lasting from such a foundation. He replied simply, "We miss you too. Grace made something for the community wall. Can't wait to show you." As he looked out over the new school, the physical manifestation of their shared vision, Ryan thought about that first explosive moment that had started it all. Victoria Ashford mocking Helen's watch. Him standing his ground in a basement electrical room. How strange that such an inauspicious beginning could lead here to this moment of shared hope and purpose. Life, like electricity, followed unexpected paths. Currents that seemed destined to repel sometimes formed connections instead. And sometimes the most damaged circuits could be rewired, transformed into something new and beautiful and strong. The three of them, Ryan, Grace, and Vicky, were forming such a circuit now. Imperfect, still fragile, but carrying a current of possibility that promised to light their way forward together. Ryan touched Helen's watch, a gesture that had once been a connection to the past, but now felt like a blessing for the future. Then he turned and walked into the school, toward the office where blueprints for the next phase of their shared vision waited. There was still so much to build.